It began before most of the men on the front even realized they were at war again. In the early hours of a December morning, while snow lay undisturbed on pine branches and frost sealed the Ardennes into silence, the first 72 hours of the Battle of the Bulge quietly began to decide everything that would follow. Not with a single massive clash, not with one dramatic breakthrough, but with confusion, disbelief, and moments where hesitation lasted only seconds, yet shaped weeks of fighting and the fate of an entire campaign. The Ardennes had been labeled a quiet sector, a place to rest, a place to rotate tired units, a place where the war seemed to have drifted elsewhere. That assumption was the first crack. As American soldiers warmed their hands over stoves, wrote letters home, and listened to the forest creak under winter weight, German forces were already moving. Infantry slipped forward under cover of darkness. Armor waited with engines cold and silent. Artillery crews memorized coordinates they would soon erase with fire. Orders were whispered, not shouted. The forest absorbed everything: sound, movement, intention. When the attack came, it did not feel like history. It felt like chaos. Artillery shattered the stillness with violence so sudden it felt unreal. Shells burst among trees, splintering trunks and hurling snow into the air like ash. Communication lines vanished in minutes. Outposts were swallowed whole. Units woke to a battlefield they did not recognize, fighting enemies they had not expected, in terrain that gave no clear direction. Those first 72 hours mattered because no one understood what was happening yet. American commanders did not know whether this was a local attack or a full-scale offensive. German units advanced through fog so thick, entire battalions disappeared inside it. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles and advancing armor at the same time. Orders crossed paths and canceled one another out. Small groups of soldiers fought isolated battles without knowing if help was coming or if the front behind them still existed. In those early hours, decisions were made without certainty. Some units fell back too quickly. Others held positions longer than expected. Some crossroads were abandoned. Others were defended without orders. Some commanders waited for clarity that never arrived. Others acted on instinct alone, and those instincts mattered. Villages that were never meant to become battlegrounds suddenly defined the map. Bastogne, St. Vith, Elsenborn Ridge, names that would echo for decades, were not yet legends. They were simply places where someone chose to stand, or chose to delay, or chose to refuse to move. The German plan depended on speed. Every hour lost mattered. Every roadblock delayed fuel. Every unexpected stand bled momentum. During those first 72 hours, German columns surged forward, but not cleanly. Tanks funneled into narrow roads that could not support them. Traffic jams formed in forests, where a single disabled vehicle could halt an entire division. Fuel burned faster than calculations allowed. Detours multiplied. Time slipped away. At the same moment, the Allies began to recover from shock. Messages filtered through. Patterns emerged. Commanders realized this was not a raid. It was everything Germany had left. Units were rushed in from quiet sectors. Artillery was repositioned. Roads were blocked deliberately. Engineers destroyed bridges at the last possible moment. Small groups were ordered to hold ground, not because it was ideal, but because it was necessary. The first 72 hours were when the battle's character was set. German forces achieved surprise, but not collapse. They gained ground, but not decision. They advanced, but without control. And that difference defined the rest of the battle. By the time the fog began to lift and the skies cleared, the shape of the war had already been altered. The Germans had pushed far, but not fast enough. They had broken lines, but not coordination. They had shocked the front but failed to shatter it. The Allies, battered and confused, had bought time, the most valuable resource of all. That time allowed air power to return. It allowed reinforcements to arrive. It allowed defensive lines to harden. It allowed German fuel shortages to become fatal rather than manageable. None of that would have been possible without those first 72 hours. Hours where small unit actions mattered more than grand strategy. Hours where sergeants made decisions generals could not yet make. Hours where road junctions, frozen hills, and stubborn stands quietly determined the limits of the offensive. The Battle of the Bulge was not won or lost in its final counterattacks. It was shaped in its opening confusion. Tonight, we return to those first moments, to the fog, the snow, the disbelief, and the choices made under pressure before anyone truly understood the scale of what was unfolding. We returned to the 72 hours when momentum was fragile, outcomes uncertain, and the future of the Western Front balanced on decisions measured in minutes. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something simple and personal. Where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time of day or night has settled around you as this story begins? And if these long, immersive journeys into histories help your thoughts slow, your breathing deepen, or your mind drift toward rest, consider subscribing. December 15th, 1944, 11:47 at night. Private James Campbell crouches in a foxhole along the Our River in eastern Belgium, his breath forming clouds in the frigid December air. Across the dark water, barely 200 yards away, he hears something that makes his blood freeze. Tank engines, dozens of them. The deep guttural rumble of heavy armor moving through forest roads, the metallic clanking of treads on frozen ground. He grabs the field telephone, cranks the handle with shaking hands, and reports what he hears to battalion headquarters. The response comes back swift and dismissive. Nerves, probably our own vehicles, get some sleep. Campbell puts down the phone and listens to the darkness. The engines keep growling. What Private Campbell didn't know, what nobody in American intelligence knew, was that he had just detected the leading edge of the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940. 410,000 German troops, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, 2,000 artillery pieces, all of them assembled in complete secrecy along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes forest, poised to strike at the weakest point in the Allied line. It was a ghost army, invisible to aerial reconnaissance, silent on the airwaves, hidden beneath the snow-laden trees of the Eifel region, and in less than 6 hours, it would come crashing through the American lines like a tidal wave through sand castles. The question that would haunt Allied commanders for decades wasn't whether they could have stopped it. The question was how they never saw it coming. The intelligence failure that allowed the Battle of the Bulge to achieve complete surprise wasn't a simple oversight. It was the result of the most sophisticated German deception operation of the entire war, a masterpiece of misdirection that fooled an Allied intelligence apparatus that had grown overconfident from months of uninterrupted victories. Since D-Day, American and British forces had pushed steadily eastward, liberating France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, driving the Wehrmacht back toward the Rhine River. Every indicator suggested Germany was finished, collapsing under the weight of simultaneous offensives from east and west. Ultra-intercepts, the decoded German Enigma messages that gave the Allies an unprecedented window into enemy planning, showed nothing unusual. Aerial reconnaissance photographs revealed no massive troop concentrations. Prisoner interrogations offered no hints of a coming offensive. The silence was so complete it should have been suspicious. Instead, it was reassuring. Behind that silence lay a German operation of breathtaking audacity. Adolf Hitler himself had conceived the offensive in mid-September, naming it Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, deliberately choosing a defensive-sounding name to confuse Allied intelligence if word leaked out. The plan was simple in concept, desperate in execution. Punch through the lightly defended Ardennes, drive northwest to the Meuse River, then wheel north to capture the vital port of Antwerp. Split the Allied armies in two. Surround and destroy 35 divisions. Force the British and Americans to negotiate a separate peace. It was the same route Germany had used in 1940 when they conquered France in 6 weeks. Hitler believed he could do it again. His generals, battle-hardened, professionals who understood the catastrophic shortage of fuel, ammunition, and trained replacements, knew it was madness, but nobody dared tell the Führer no. So, they planned the impossible. The deception measures were extraordinary. Beginning in early November, German units designated for the offensive moved only at night, their vehicles camouflaged, their routes carefully planned to avoid observation. All radio communications ceased. Orders were delivered by motorcycle courier, a return to First World War methods that rendered ultra-intercepts useless. Artillery pieces were drawn into position by horses to muffle the sound. Tank treads were wrapped in straw to deaden their clanging on cobblestones. Dummy radio traffic continued from the unit's previous positions in central Germany, creating the illusion that these divisions remained hundreds of miles from the front. Civilians in the assembly areas were evacuated or confined to their homes under penalty of death. Even the weather cooperated, low clouds and winter fog that grounded Allied reconnaissance aircraft for days at a stretch. By mid-December, nearly 500,000 men and their equipment had concentrated in the Eifel forests without triggering a single alarm. But there were warnings. Private Campbell wasn't the only soldier who heard tank engines in the night. On December 13th, a German deserter crossed the lines near Monschau and told interrogators that a major offensive was coming within days, that assault troops were massing in the forest, that something big was about to happen. His information was forwarded up the chain of command, evaluated, and dismissed as either misinformation or the exaggerations of a frightened man. On December 14th, a patrol from the 99th Infantry Division captured a German lieutenant carrying detailed maps that showed assembly areas and approach routes. The maps were sent to intelligence officers who concluded they showed defensive preparations, not offensive ones. On December 15th, Colonel Benjamin Dixon, 1st Army's chief intelligence officer, completed a prescient analysis warning that the Germans had the capability to launch a spoiling attack in the Ardennes. His memo landed on desks at various headquarters that afternoon. That evening, Dixon was sent on leave to Paris. He would be sipping coffee in a French cafe when the offensive began. The American positions along the Ardennes front were thinly held by design. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, considered this sector a quiet rest area where green divisions could gain experience and veteran divisions could recover from heavy fighting farther north and south. The 8th Corps, commanded by Major General Troy Middleton, defended an 88-mile front with just 83,000 men. Simple mathematics revealed the problem. Each soldier was responsible for defending approximately 1,000 yards of terrain, more than 3 times the recommended density. Some positions were separated by gaps of a mile or more, forests and hills where nobody stood watch because there weren't enough bodies to fill every hole. The German planners had studied these dispositions carefully. They knew exactly where the seams were. They knew exactly where to push. Among the units holding this overextended line was the 106th Infantry Division, fresh from the United States, in combat for exactly 5 days. The 99th Infantry Division, the Checkerboard Division, had arrived just 2 weeks earlier and was still learning the terrain. The 28th Infantry Division, the Keystone Division, was recovering from brutal fighting in the Hurtgen Forest where it had suffered 9,000 casualties. These weren't bad troops. They were tired troops, inexperienced troops, and critically, they were spread impossibly thin. The German plan called for overwhelming these weak points with concentrated force, achieving local superiority of 6 or 8 to 1 at the breakthrough points, rolling up the flanks, and driving deep into the rear areas before Allied reserves could react. It was blitzkrieg tactics applied to a defensive line that couldn't defend. The final element in Germany's desperate gamble was fuel. The Wehrmacht started the offensive with enough gasoline and diesel for 5 days of operations at moderate tempo, maybe 150 to 180 miles of movement. The distance from the start line to Antwerp was 125 miles. On paper, it looked feasible, but the plan required capturing massive American fuel depots intact during the first 48 hours. Particularly the enormous stockpiles at Stavelot, Spa, and other towns just behind the front. German staff officers calculated they needed to seize approximately 50 million gallons of Allied fuel to sustain the drive all the way to Antwerp. It was a plan that depended on the enemy cooperating, on fuel dumps falling into German hands before demolition charges could be set, on American defenders abandoning their supplies in panic. It assumed a repeat of 1940 when French armies collapsed in confusion. It assumed the Americans would break and run. At 5:30 on the morning of December 16, 1944, the assumptions would be tested. 2,000 German artillery pieces would open fire simultaneously along the 80-mile front, the largest artillery barrage on the Western Front since the First World War. Searchlights would bounce off the low cloud ceiling, creating artificial moonlight to guide the assault troops forward. And somewhere in the darkness, Private James Campbell and thousands of soldiers like him would realize that the sounds they had been hearing, the warnings they'd been filing, the instincts that told them something was wrong had all been correct. The Ghost Army was real, and it was already at the gates. December 16, 1944. 5:29 and 30 seconds. American soldiers along the Ardennes front are asleep in their foxholes, in cellars of abandoned farmhouses, in the warming tents behind the lines where cooks prepare breakfast. In 30 seconds, their war will change forever. Some will die in the first minutes. Some will fight isolated battles for days. Some will spend the rest of the war in prisoner camps. But right now, in these final moments of peace, they don't know. They're dreaming of home, of Christmas packages that arrived yesterday, of the quiet sector that lets them sleep through the night. 20 seconds. 15. 10. Then the world explodes. The artillery barrage that begins at exactly 5:30 shatters the winter silence like a hammer through ice. 2,000 German guns fire as one, a coordinated strike that's been planned to the minute, registered to specific coordinates, timed to obliterate American command posts, communication lines, and artillery positions before the infantry ever moves forward. The sound is indescribable to anyone who hasn't experienced massed artillery fire. It's not individual explosions, but a continuous roar, a wall of sound and overpressure that seems to come from everywhere at once. Men wake screaming, their eardrums bleeding, their senses overwhelmed. Foxholes collapse from near misses. Trees burst into splinters. The frozen ground heaves and cracks. And mixed with high explosive shells are white phosphorus rounds that burn at 5,000 degrees, turning night into flickering orange day, starting fires in wooden buildings that will burn for hours. In the village of Losheim, right in the center of what will become known as the Losheim Gap, Private Richard McKee stumbles from his cellar billet and tries to make sense of the chaos. His first thought is that this must be German harassing fire, the occasional nighttime shelling that both sides use to keep the enemy nervous. But the intensity is wrong. Shells are landing everywhere, systematically walking through the town, demolishing buildings one by one. He runs for the company command post, intending to report, to ask for orders, to do something. The telephone lines are dead. Cut by saboteurs, he'll learn later, severed in the night by German commandos wearing American uniforms who infiltrated the lines before the attack. McKee grabs his rifle and heads for his position on the outskirts of town. Behind him, the command post takes a direct hit and ceases to exist. 3 miles north, in the town of Hosingen, Lieutenant Paul Hogue peers through the fog and falling snow at movement in the valley below. At first, he thinks they're American tank destroyers, the low-slung vehicles that have been supporting his position for the past week. Then one fires. The muzzle flash illuminates the vehicle clearly. It's a German Sturmgeschütz assault gun, and behind it are dozens more, advancing in line with infantry running alongside. Hoeg orders his men to open fire, rifled busy. Rounds spark off armor plate. The assault guns don't even slow down. They roll through the American outpost positions like they aren't there, crushing foxholes under their treads, machine guns chattering. Within 15 minutes, Hosingen is surrounded. Hoeg's radio operator manages to transmit one message before the radio goes dead. "We are being overrun. Cannot hold. Send help." The message reaches battalion headquarters. There is no help to send. At exactly 6:15, 18 men holding a position near the village of Lanzerath watch 500 German paratroopers emerge from the forest. Lieutenant Lyle Buch's intelligence and reconnaissance platoon has held this position for 3 days, a small cluster of foxholes covering a crucial crossroads where 5 roads converge. They're not supposed to fight. They're supposed to observe, report, and withdraw if threatened. But the telephone lines are cut, their radio has limited range, and the German column approaching them is too large to avoid. Bulge makes a decision that will save thousands of lives and doom his own men to captivity. He orders his platoon to hold position and fight. 18 men against 500. The Germans have no idea what they're walking into. The initial American response to the bombardment ranges from confusion to outright disbelief. At 8th Corps headquarters in Bastogne, Major General Troy Middleton receives fragmentary reports that paint no coherent picture. The 99th Division reports heavy shelling and infantry attacks. The 106th Division reports similar attacks 15 miles south. The 28th Division reports probing attacks along its entire front. But the reports are sporadic, confused, often contradicting each other. Phone lines are down across huge sections of the front. Radio traffic is jammed by German transmitters broadcasting on American frequencies. And critically, nobody believes this is anything more than local attacks, spoiling raids designed to disrupt American offensive preparations farther north. The idea that Germany would launch a major offensive in December in the Ardennes, with its difficult terrain and limited roads, seems absurd. The idea that they could mass the forces for such an offensive without detection seems impossible, so the reports are evaluated, filed, and judged to be exaggerations born of surprise and fear. But some officers recognize the pattern. At First Army headquarters in Spa, staff officers begin plotting the incoming reports on situation maps and see something disturbing. The attacks aren't random, they're coordinated, hitting multiple points simultaneously along an 80-mile front. That requires planning, concentration of forces, command and control on a scale that suggests something far larger than spoiling attacks. By 7 in the morning, less than 90 minutes into the offensive, a few voices are raising alarm. This isn't local. This is big. Messages are sent up the chain of command, marked urgent. But it will take hours for those messages to reach the officers with authority to commit reserves, to shift forces, to recognize that the entire strategic situation in northwestern Europe has just changed. Hours they don't have. The German timetable is brutally ambitious. The assault troops are supposed to punch through the American lines in the first 6 hours, creating gaps for the armored divisions to exploit. By nightfall on the 16th, German tanks should be 10 miles behind the front, overrunning supply dumps, capturing bridges across the numerous rivers and streams that cut through the Ardennes. By the morning of December 17th, just 36 hours after the offensive begins, German spearheads should reach the Meuse River, the last major geographical barrier before open country leading to Antwerp. It's a timetable that assumes everything goes perfectly, that American resistance collapses, that fuel supplies hold out, that bridges aren't demolished, that weather stays bad enough to keep Allied aircraft grounded. It assumes a repeat of 1940. Instead, reality intrudes immediately. At dozens of points along the front, American units don't collapse. They fight from their positions, delaying the German advance by hours, sometimes by days. Communication may be disrupted, but junior officers and NCOs make decisions on their own, adapting to chaos without waiting for orders that will never come. Engineers who should be building bridges find themselves defending towns with rifles and hand grenades. Artillerymen fire their howitzers over open sights at approaching tanks, using weapons designed for indirect fire as giant shotguns. Cooks, clerks, drivers, and bandsmen pick up weapons and form defensive lines because there's nobody else. The Ardennes offensive will produce hundreds of small unit actions, desperate stands by soldiers who had no business stopping armored divisions, but somehow did, at least long enough to disrupt the German timetable. By noon on December 16th, 6.5 hours into the offensive, the situation map at German headquarters shows troubling developments. Some units have advanced 5 or 6 miles. Others are still fighting through the initial American positions, bogged down by unexpected resistance, delayed by demolished bridges, slowed by terrible roads turned to mud by tracked vehicles. The 6th Panzer Army in the north, which has the shortest distance to the Meuse River and the best roads, is making the slowest progress. The 5th Panzer Army in the center is doing better, but not on schedule. The 7th Army in the south is barely moving at all, pinned down by the 28th Infantry Division's stubborn defense. Clocks are ticking. Every hour of delay means one fewer hour of darkness to hide from Allied aircraft. Every hour of delay means fuel burning without corresponding territorial gain. The Ghost Army has revealed itself. Now it has to prove the gamble was worth it. December 16th, 1944, 7:30 in the morning. Lieutenant Lyle Bulge keys the handset of his field telephone one more time, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, will answer. Static crackles in his ear. The line is dead. His intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, 18 men with rifles, 150 caliber machine gun, and whatever ammunition they carried into position 3 days ago, is cut off and alone. From his foxhole at the edge of Lanzerath, he can see the problem unfolding in the valley below. German paratroopers, hundreds of them, forming up in neat ranks on the road leading toward his position. They're not rushing forward in assault formation. They're marching in column, rifles slung, apparently unaware that American soldiers are watching them from 300 yards away. Bulge realizes with sick certainty what's happening. The Germans think this position has already been overrun. They think the crossroads is theirs. They're walking into an ambush they don't know exists. Bulge's platoon isn't supposed to be here anymore. Standard doctrine for reconnaissance units is simple: observe, report, and withdraw when threatened. They're scouts, not assault troops. armed with light weapons suitable for self-defense, but not sustained combat. But Buch requested permission to withdraw 4 hours ago, before the German bombardment even started, when his outpost troops spotted massive enemy movement in the forest. His battalion commander denied the request. There were reports of German infiltrators in American uniforms causing chaos behind the lines, and headquarters suspected Buch had been fooled by a few commandos and stolen gear. "Stay in position," the order came back. "Maintain observation. Do not withdraw without direct orders." So, Buch stayed. And now, with phone lines cut and his radio's battery nearly dead, he's alone with the most important decision of his military career. The Lanzerath crossroads doesn't look strategic. It's a minor intersection where 5 roads converge in a shallow valley surrounded by forest, the kind of place you'd drive through without noticing. But those 5 roads are critical to the German advance. One leads west toward the Meuse River. One leads north toward the key town of Malmedy. 2 lead to other vital crossroads that connect to the main highway network. The 5th leads back to Germany and the German assembly areas where an entire SS Panzer Division, 6,000 men, dozens of tanks, the most powerful armored formation in the Ardennes, is waiting for the road to open. The German plan requires this crossroads to fall in the first 2 hours of the offensive, cleared and secured so the panzers can race through on schedule. 7 hours have passed. The crossroads is still held by 18 Americans in foxholes, and the German paratroopers advancing toward it have no idea. Buch's men are frighteningly young. Most are teenagers, a few still months from their 19th birthdays. They've been in combat for less than a month, assigned to the 99th Division when it arrived in theater in November. The platoon sergeant, William Slape, is 23 and considered the old man of the unit. They're armed with M1 Garand rifles, the standard American infantry weapon, 8-round clips, semi-automatic fire, effective to 500 yards in trained hands. They have 1 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, a devastating weapon capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, heavy enough to punch through engine blocks. And they have perhaps 2,000 rounds of ammunition total, maybe less. Buch does quick math in his head. 18 rifles at 8 rounds per clip, maybe 15 clips per man, 2,000 rounds for the machine gun, against 500 German paratroopers who will be reinforced by an entire panzer division if they succeed. The math doesn't work. But sometimes you fight anyway. At 3 in the afternoon, after 8 hours of watching and waiting, the Germans finally advance. The first assault wave, approximately 100 paratroopers in loose skirmish formation, crosses the field toward Buch's position. They're moving cautiously now, aware that someone might be defending the crossroads, but they're not expecting organized resistance. Buch lets them close to 100 yards, 75 yards, 50 yards. His men's fingers are white on their rifle triggers, every nerve screaming to fire, to do something. 40 yards. Buch whispers into his platoon's fighting positions. "Pick your targets. Fire on my command. Fire for effect." At 35 yards, close enough to see the details on German uniforms, Buch squeezes his trigger. 17 other rifles fire as one. The 50 caliber machine gun opens up a second later. It's heavy, thump, 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 audible, a mile away. The impact on the German assault line is catastrophic. Men fall in windows, cut down before they can react. The survivors hit the ground, scrambling for cover in the shallow folds of terrain that offer no real protection. Return fire is scattered and wild, bullets snapping through the trees above the American positions, but hitting nothing. The machine gun traverses back and forth, firing in short bursts, forcing the Germans to stay pinned. For 15 minutes, the firefight rages at point-blank range. Then the German assault troops disengage, pulling back into the forest, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. Buch's platoon has suffered 0 casualties. The Germans have lost perhaps 30 men. It's the perfect small unit ambush, a textbook example of how prepared defenders with good fields of fire can devastate a larger force. It's also a temporary victory. The Germans will come back. They have to. That crossroads is too important to abandon. The second German assault comes at 5 in the afternoon. Twilight falling, 3 companies this time, maybe 300 men attacking from 2 directions simultaneously. Buch's platoon fires until rifle barrels glow red-hot, until ammunition belts run empty, until there's nothing left to shoot. The Germans get within 20 yards of some positions before withering fire drives them back. They try again at 7 in the evening, this time with artillery support that walks shells through the American foxholes, collapsing some, wounding several defenders. Still Buch's men hold. They're down to final magazines now, last belts for the machine gun, rationing every shot. In the darkness, Buch can hear German officers rallying their troops for another assault. He knows what comes next. When the ammunition runs out, this position falls. It's simple mathematics. At 8 in the evening, with darkness complete and ammunition almost exhausted, Buch makes the hardest decision of his life. He orders his men to cease fire, to surrender before the Germans launch another assault that will overrun the position and kill everyone. White undershirts are tied to rifle barrels and raised above the foxholes. The firing stops. German paratroopers advance cautiously, weapons ready, expecting a trick. When they finally accept that the Americans are surrendering, when they've collected Buch and his 17 men and searched them for weapons, a German officer asks the obvious question. Through a soldier who speaks English, the question comes, how many men were defending this position? Buch answers honestly, 18. The German officer stares at him in disbelief. He's lost more than 90 men killed, and perhaps 150 wounded, capturing this insignificant crossroads, against 18 Americans. It seems impossible, but the evidence is scattered across the field. What nobody knows as Buch and his men are marched into captivity is that their 18-man stand has altered the course of the entire offensive. Kampfgruppe Piper, the strongest German armored column in the Ardennes, 72 tanks including 30 massive King Tigers, 6,000 elite SS troops, the spearhead that's supposed to reach the Meuse River in 36 hours, has been waiting behind Lanzerath for 24 hours while the paratroopers cleared that crossroads. 24 hours of daylight burned. Fuel consumed sitting idle, surprise advantage diminished. When Piper's tanks finally roll through Lanzerath, late on the night of December 16th, they're a full day behind schedule. They'll never make up that lost time. And years later, after the war, after careful analysis of German timetables and fuel consumption rates, historians will conclude that those 24 hours were the difference between the offensive reaching the Meuse River and stalling miles short. 18 men. One day. The entire outcome balanced on that margin. For 37 years, Lyle Buch's platoon receives no recognition for their stand at Lanzerath. No medals, no commendations, no mention in official histories. They were reconnaissance troops who disobeyed doctrine by fighting instead of withdrawing. Survivors of a chaotic battle whose significance wouldn't be clear for decades. Most of them spend the rest of the war in German prison camps. Buch himself endures months of captivity, survives liberation, comes home, and tries to forget. It's not until 1981, when a researcher interviewing German officers learns about the mysterious resistance at Lanzerath and tracks down the survivors, that the story emerges. On October 15, 1981, President Ronald Reagan awards the Presidential Unit Citation to the I&R Platoon, 18th Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. 18 men who held a crossroads and changed history. Better late than never. December 17, 1944, 7 in the morning. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Piper stands in the turret of his command tank and watches his column finally break through the Lanzerath bottleneck. After 24 hours of delay, the most powerful armored formation in the German arsenal is moving again. 72 tanks, half of them the massive King Tigers weighing 70 tons each, armed with 88mm guns that can destroy any Allied tank at 3,000 yards. 6,000 troops in half-tracks and trucks, all of them volunteers from the 1st SS Panzer Division, veterans of the Eastern Front who fought from Kursk to Normandy. 500 vehicles stretched in a column 12 miles long, engines roaring, treads clanking, pushing west toward the Meuse River. Piper checks his map, calculates distance and time. 125 miles to the river. At 30 miles per hour, 4 hours of driving. He's already a day late. But now, finally, he's moving. The blitzkrieg can begin. What Piper doesn't know, what German intelligence never properly assessed, is that the Ardennes road network wasn't designed for 70-ton tanks. These roads were built centuries ago for farm wagons, widened slightly for civilian cars, never engineered to support the weight and width of heavy armor. Within the first hour of movement, Piper's column encounters problems. A King Tiger tries to cross a stone bridge and the structure cracks, forcing engineers to spend precious time reinforcing it. Two tanks slide off muddy roads and block traffic for 90 minutes, while recovery vehicles struggle to pull them free. Village streets designed for a single cart suddenly have to accommodate vehicles 9 feet wide, and corners become nightmares of crushed stone walls and knocked-over buildings. The planned average speed of 30 miles per hour becomes 20, then 15, then in some sections less than 5. Piper's fury grows with every delay. He's supposed to be racing toward the Meuse. Instead, he's fighting a war against geography. At 1 p.m, Piper's lead elements reach the Baugnes crossroads near the town of Malmedy. Here, the advance column encounters Battery B of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, 30 trucks carrying American forward observers and their equipment, completely unaware that German armor has broken through. It's not a fight. The Americans are in soft-skinned vehicles, armed with carbines and pistols, surrounded before they understand what's happening. Within minutes, 120 men have surrendered, been disarmed, and herded into a field beside the road. Piper's tanks don't stop. They have a schedule to keep, and prisoners are not part of that schedule. 2 tanks and a half-track remain behind to guard the Americans. What happens next will become the most infamous atrocity of the Battle of the Bulge. At approximately 1:30, without warning or apparent provocation, machine guns open fire on the American prisoners standing in the field. Men fall in waves, some killed instantly, others wounded and crawling, seeking cover that doesn't exist. The firing continues for several minutes, methodical and thorough. When the guns finally fall silent, 84 Americans lie dead or dying in the snow. 11 men survive by feigning death, lying motionless among the corpses until the Germans depart, then escaping through the forest to reach American lines. Their testimonies will eventually lead to war crimes trials, convictions, death sentences for some of the perpetrators. But in the immediate aftermath, the Malmedy massacre has a different effect. Word spreads through American units with stunning speed. The Germans are executing prisoners. No quarter given, none expected. Units that might have surrendered when surrounded decide to fight instead. The massacre hardens American resistance at precisely the moment when German momentum depends on enemies choosing surrender over death. By 6 p.m, Piper's column reaches the town of Stavelot on the Amblève River. Here, geography presents an almost insurmountable problem. The only bridge across the river is an 18th century stone structure, narrow and low, built for horses and carts. Piper's engineers examine it and deliver bad news. It might support a 50-ton Panther tank. It absolutely will not support a 70-ton King Tiger. Piper faces an agonizing choice. Send the lighter tanks across immediately and hope they can seize objectives without heavy armor support, or wait while engineers reinforce the bridge to carry his King Tigers. He chooses aggression, Panthers and Panthers only. The King Tigers will have to find another route. It's another delay, another complication, another deviation from the plan that assumed bridges would either be captured intact or could be quickly rebuilt. The town of Stavelot itself offers another unexpected obstacle. American engineers, finally reacting to the breakthrough, have prepared the bridge for demolition. Charges are set, wires are laid, the plunger is ready. But the officer in charge makes a fateful decision. He waits to blow the bridge until he's certain German tanks are committed to crossing, not wanting to destroy this vital structure if there's any chance the Germans will turn away. It's sound tactical thinking that nearly proves catastrophic. Piper's lead tanks race through the town and onto the bridge before anyone realizes they're not stopping. The engineer officer grabs the plunger and mashes it down. Nothing happens. The primer cord has been severed by shell fire. As American engineers scramble to rig a backup detonation system, German tanks cross the bridge and fan out on the far side. Stavelot is lost. The road west is open. Piper's spearhead drives deeper into the Allied rear. At 2 a.m. on December 18th, 34 hours into the offensive, Piper's advance guard reaches the fuel depot at Stoumont, a massive American supply dump containing thousands of gallons of precious gasoline and diesel. This is the moment the entire German plan depends upon, capturing Allied fuel to sustain the advance to Antwerp. Piper's tanks roll into the depot complex and find it empty, evacuated. Every drum removed or destroyed, every storage tank drained, buildings set afire to ensure nothing remains. American quartermaster troops have beaten Piper to his objective by approximately 4 hours, loading fuel onto trucks and driving west ahead of the German advance. Piper's fuel situation is now critical. He started the offensive with 90% fuel capacity. After 2 days of movement and combat, he's down to perhaps 30%. Without captured supplies, his tanks will run dry within 24 hours. The mathematical reality of the offensive is becoming inescapable. By 10 in the morning, on December 18th, Piper's spearhead reaches its high water mark. His lead tanks push through the village of Stoumont and onto the road leading toward the Meuse River. The bridge is visible in the distance, approximately 3.5 miles away. 3.5 miles from the first major objective of the entire offensive. 3.5 miles from open country where panzers could operate freely. And there, on that muddy road with the Meuse River tantalizingly close, Piper's advance stops. Not because of enemy resistance, because the fuel gauges read empty. The Panthers and Mark IVs and half-tracks roll to a halt, engines coughing, tanks exhausted. Behind them stretches a trail of abandoned vehicles, broken down equipment, casualties, and chaos. Ahead lies everything they were supposed to achieve. And between those 2 points lies an impossible gap, measured in gallons of gasoline that don't exist. Piper's radio traffic that morning tells the story in stark, professional language. He reports his position to division headquarters, acknowledges that he cannot advance without fuel, requests immediate resupply by air. The response is not encouraging. The Luftwaffe will attempt resupply missions, but Allied fighters now control the skies. Weather is clearing. Fuel, supplies in Germany are critically low. There's nothing to send. Piper receives new orders: hold position, establish defensive perimeter, await relieving forces. The hammer that was supposed to shatter Allied defenses has become an anvil, stationary, and vulnerable. Over the next 4 days, American forces will gradually surround and destroy most of Piper's command. Of the 6,000 men who started the offensive, fewer than 800 will make it back to German lines. The 72 tanks are all lost, abandoned, or destroyed. The most powerful German armored formation in the West has spent itself attacking 3.5 miles short of its objective. And in the burned-out hulks of those King Tigers lies the truth about Germany's gamble. Desperation is not a substitute for logistics. December 16, 1944, 10:30 in the morning. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits at his desk, reviewing morning intelligence reports from across the Western Front. The British 21st Army Group in the north is preparing for offensive operations toward the Rhine. Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army in the south is pushing toward the Saar. And in the center, in the quiet Ardennes sector, First Army reports some unusual German activity. Shelling, probing attacks. Nothing that sounds alarming. Eisenhower's intelligence chief, Major General Kenneth Strong, has flagged these reports with a note suggesting they might indicate something larger, but the general mood at headquarters is skepticism. Germany is finished. These are the last gasps of a dying army. The morning briefing proceeds with routine efficiency, and Eisenhower turns his attention to more pressing matters. Supply shortages, Montgomery's constant demands for reinforcements, political pressures from Washington. The Ardennes barely rates a mention. By 8:45 that evening, everything has changed. Eisenhower is at dinner with his staff when an aide enters with updated reports from First Army. The aide's face tells the story before words do. The attacks in the Ardennes are not probing raids. They're a major offensive. Multiple German divisions identified. Breakthrough achieved at several points. Communications disrupted across wide areas. American units surrounded or out of contact. The scale is still unclear, but one fact is inescapable. This is the real thing. Eisenhower stands, dinner forgotten, and walks to the situation map. His staff gathers around him, watching as he studies the red markers indicating German attacks. The silence stretches for perhaps 30 seconds. Then Eisenhower does what great commanders do. He makes a decision before he has all the facts, a decision that will shape the entire campaign. The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster, Eisenhower says quietly. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table. His staff exchanges glances. Opportunity? The Germans have just launched the largest offensive in months, broken through at multiple points, and are driving toward vital supply centers. How is this an opportunity? Eisenhower explains his reasoning with brutal logic. The Germans have come out of their prepared defenses. They're exposed, stretched thin, operating at the end of supply lines that are vulnerable to counterattack. If the Allies can contain the breakthrough and then strike at the shoulders of the penetration, they can encircle and destroy multiple German armies in the open, inflicting losses Germany cannot replace. But that opportunity exists only if Allied reserves move now, immediately, before German momentum becomes unstoppable. Every hour of delay means another mile of German advance, another town lost, another supply depot at risk. At 11 that night, Eisenhower makes the most important snap decision of his military career. Without authorization from the combined chiefs of staff, without approval from Washington or London, without even a complete understanding of what he's facing, he commits the strategic reserve. The 7th Armored Division, currently resting after heavy combat, will move immediately to St. Vith to block the northern German penetration. The 10th Armored Division will move to Bastogne to anchor the southern shoulder. Both divisions will travel through the night, 100 miles or more through winter darkness on icy roads, racing against German spearheads that are driving toward the same objectives. It's a gamble based on incomplete information. If Eisenhower is wrong about German intentions, if this is a feint and the real attack comes somewhere else, those divisions will be out of position when they're desperately needed. But Eisenhower's instincts tell him this is the main effort, and in war, hesitation kills more surely than mistakes. The next critical decision involves command structure, and this one is politically explosive. First Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, has responsibility for the Ardennes sector. But First Army headquarters at Spa is now dangerously close to German spearheads, possibly about to be overrun. Moreover, the German breakthrough has split American forces. Hodges' units north of the penetration are separated from Patton's Third Army in the south. Coordinating a counteroffensive across this divide will be extremely difficult if First Army tries to command units on both sides of the Bulge. Eisenhower makes a choice that will infuriate American commanders and delight the British. He temporarily transfers all American units north of the breakthrough to British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Montgomery will command approximately half the American forces in the Ardennes, a bitter pill for American pride, but a practical necessity for unified command. At 3 in the morning on December 17th, Eisenhower places a phone call to Lieutenant General George Patton at Third Army headquarters in Luxembourg. The conversation is brief and characteristic of both men. George, Eisenhower says, "I want you to prepare to shift your attack north." There's a pause on the line, then Patton's voice, eager and aggressive. "When do you want me to attack?" Eisenhower tells him, December 22nd, 5 days hence. Patton suggests he can attack in 48 hours if needed, a typically bold Patton statement that Eisenhower knows is probably impossible but appreciates nonetheless. They settle on the 22nd. Patton will have to disengage from his current offensive, pivot his entire Third Army 90 degrees north, move 250,000 men and 50,000 vehicles, and attack into the southern flank of the German penetration. It's the largest and most complex redeployment in American military history. Patton promises it will happen on schedule, and incredibly, it will. The delay in recognizing the offensive's true scale has cost the Allies approximately 36 hours. From 5:30 on the morning of December 16th, when the first shells fell, until 8 in the evening, when Eisenhower finally grasped the situation's magnitude, the Germans had freedom to operate without major Allied interference. Those 36 hours allowed Piper to drive 30 miles behind American lines. They allowed German forces to surround the 106th Division on the Schnee-Eifel. They allowed advance elements to approach Bastogne and St. Vith before serious defenses could be organized. In hindsight, those hours seem catastrophic, a colossal intelligence failure that nearly resulted in disaster. But Eisenhower's immediate response, committing reserves without complete information, reorganizing command structure despite political costs, ordering Patton's pivot before the full situation was clear, transformed potential disaster into manageable crisis. At First Army headquarters, now relocated to Chaudefontaine after evacuating Spa, staff officers struggle to piece together a coherent picture from fragmentary reports. Major General Troy Middleton's 8th Corps, which bore the initial German assault, is fighting for survival. Middleton has 83,000 men defending an 88-mile front against more than 400,000 Germans. The math is simple and terrifying. Even if every American soldier performed perfectly, even if every defensive position held, even if no one broke under the psychological shock of massed armor and infantry attacks, the numbers don't work. In any given sector, Germans can achieve 6-1 or 8-1 local superiority, simply overwhelming defenders through weight of numbers. Middleton's only hope is to slow the German advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive, to trade space for time, to hold the critical road junctions that will channel German movement into predictable paths. The situation is desperate, but not hopeless, and that distinction matters. Germany has achieved a surprise and local superiority. They have broken through at multiple points. They have driven deep into American rear areas, but they haven't broken the Allied army. Units are fighting in place, even when surrounded. Communications are disrupted but not destroyed. Supply lines are threatened but not cut. And most critically, the Allied response is immediate and appropriate. Reserves are moving, reinforcements are coming. The situation is being managed. In 48 hours, when German momentum slows and Allied counterattacks begin, the Ardennes offensive will transition from crisis to opportunity. But nobody knows that yet. Right now, in these dark early hours of December 17th, it's a race against time. Can the Germans exploit their breakthrough before Allied reserves arrive? Can isolated American units hold long enough to be rescued? Can the thin green line in the Ardennes bend without breaking? Eisenhower spends the rest of the night on the phone, coordinating, encouraging, occasionally overruling subordinates who want to withdraw from threatened positions. His message is consistent. Hold the shoulders of the penetration, block the roads to Bastogne and St. Vith, trade time for casualties, make the Germans pay for every mile. He knows something the Germans don't fully appreciate. Time works against the attacker in this situation. Every day Germany sustains the offensive. They burn fuel they can't replace, expend ammunition they can't resupply, suffer casualties they can't afford. Every day the Allies hold. More reserves arrive, more supplies move forward, more reinforcements fill the gaps. The mathematics of industrial warfare favor the Allies overwhelmingly, but mathematics take time to manifest on the battlefield. The next 72 hours will determine whether that time exists or whether German tanks will reach the Meuse River before the equations balance. It's going to be close, closer than anyone at Supreme Headquarters wants to admit. December 16th, 1944, 4 in the afternoon. Captain Lawrence Moyer of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion stands at the bridge over the Somme River at Trois Ponts and watches American troops streaming east in chaotic retreat. He's received reports that German armor has broken through the lines, that spearheads are driving west, that his battalion, trained to build bridges, not defend them, may soon be fighting for their lives. His orders are explicit but contradictory. Hold all bridges open for retreating American forces, but prepare them for demolition if German tanks appear. How do you know when to stop letting Americans through and start blowing the bridge? When do you make the call that might kill your own men? Moyer has been an engineer for 8 years, a soldier for 12. He's built bridges in Louisiana, England, and France. He's never had to destroy one while friendlies are still on the wrong side. He's about to learn. The Ardennes terrain is defined by its rivers. The Our River forms the German-Belgian border. The Amblève River runs roughly parallel 20 miles west. The Somme and the Orthe create additional barriers. And beyond them, all flows the Meuse, the final major obstacle before open country leading to Antwerp. These rivers aren't large by American standards. Most are less than 50 feet wide, shallow enough to wade in summer. But their valleys create natural barriers that funnel traffic onto bridges and through villages. There are exactly 12 roads in the entire Ardennes region, capable of supporting armored divisions. 12 roads for German armies trying to move 500,000 men and 2,000 vehicles westward. Control those roads, particularly the crossroads where they intersect, and you control the entire battlefield. The Allies don't fully understand this yet. The Germans have built their entire operational plan around it. 7 towns emerge as critical nodes in the road network, places where multiple routes converge, and whoever controls the intersection controls movement for miles around. St. Vith in the north, where 5 roads meet. Bastogne in the south where 7 roads converge, the only junction with that density in a 40-mile radius. Malmedy, Stavelot, and Trois Ponts, forming a triangle of road intersections between the German start line and the Meuse. Houffalize and Vielsalm providing alternate routes if primary roads are blocked. These aren't large towns. Saint-Vith has fewer than 2,000 civilians. Bastogne maybe 4,000. They're market towns where farmers sell produce, places so insignificant that most soldiers can't pronounce their names correctly. But in the winter of 1944, these obscure Belgian villages become the hinges on which the entire offensive turns. German planning documents captured later in the campaign reveal the extraordinary detail with which they studied this road network. Staff officers identified not just the major routes, but every minor road, forest track, and cow path that might support vehicle movement. They calculated how many tanks per hour could transit specific bridges, how long it would take columns to pass through the villages with narrow streets, where bottlenecks would develop. They designated primary routes for specific divisions and alternate routes if primary ones were blocked. It's textbook German staff work, thorough and professional. But the planning reveals a fatal assumption, that roads and bridges would be available, that American engineers wouldn't have time to prepare demolitions, that chaos and surprise would prevent organized destruction of key infrastructure. The Germans planned for rapid breakthrough. They didn't plan for American engineers who'd spent weeks wiring bridges for demolition, just in case. The 51st Engineer Combat Battalion arrives in Malmedy on December 17th with orders to defend the town at all costs. The battalion commander, Colonel Harvey Fraser, has 750 men trained to operate bulldozers, pour concrete, and build Bailey bridges. Exactly 0 of them have trained for infantry combat. Their weapons consist of carbines, a few machine guns, and whatever explosives remain in their demolition stocks. Against them come elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, battle-hardened veterans with tanks, assault guns, and years of combat experience. Fraser deploys his men in defensive positions around the town's perimeter, distributes ammunition, and delivers a speech that's remarkable for its honesty. "We're engineers, we're not infantry, but today we fight like infantry because there's nobody else." The 51st Engineers will hold Malmedy for 4 days, suffering 68% casualties, buying time for armor reinforcements to arrive. At Trois Ponts, Captain Moyer's problem intensifies by the hour. German tanks are confirmed approaching from multiple directions. American stragglers are still crossing his bridges in 1s and 2s, exhausted soldiers who've been fighting for days without rest. Division headquarters keeps calling, demanding to know when the bridges will be demolished, why they're still standing. Moyer gives the same answer each time. American troops are still using them. Finally, at 6 in the morning on December 18th, with dawn breaking and German tanks reportedly 2 miles away, Moyer receives the order he's been dreading. Blow the bridges now. He issues evacuation warnings to troops on the far side, giving them 15 minutes to cross. Some make it, some don't. At 6:15, engineers hit plungers at 3 bridges simultaneously. 3,000 pounds of TNT detonates in clouds of smoke and spray. The bridges collapse into the rivers, and on the far side, cut off from friendly lines, perhaps 200 American soldiers disappear into the forest. The explosion at Trois Ponts is visible from miles away. Joachim Peiper, leading his armored spearhead toward that very bridge, sees the smoke rising and knows immediately what it means. His primary route to the Meuse is cut. He has to find alternate roads, backtrack through terrain he's already covered, waste hours navigating narrow village streets that were never designed for armor. The destruction of those bridges costs Peiper approximately 6 hours and 50 miles of wasted movement. Those 6 hours represent fuel burned for no gain, time lost that will never be recovered, momentum bled away by a handful of engineers with demolition charges. Peiper's frustration is documented in radio intercepts captured by Allied signal intelligence. He's not angry at his own troops or even at American defenders. He's angry at geography, at bridges that collapse, at roads that don't go where maps say they should. He's fighting a war against the terrain itself. On December 17th, a German staff car carrying 3 officers takes a wrong turn near the village of Faymonville and drives straight into an American roadblock. The officers are captured, their vehicles searched. In the back seat, intelligence officers find detailed maps showing the complete German offensive plan. Primary routes, alternate routes, assembly areas, fuel dump locations, timetables for each day of the offensive, objectives for each division. It's an intelligence windfall, the kind of capture that happens perhaps once in a war. The maps are rushed to First Army headquarters, where analysts compare them to current German movements and realize the offensive is even larger than they feared. 6 panzer divisions, 12 infantry divisions, more than 400,000 men. The objective line clearly marked Antwerp. But the maps also reveal German logistics, their supply dumps, their fuel reserves, and the analysts notice something crucial. The Germans are already behind schedule. Every road junction they haven't captured, every bridge they haven't crossed, represents cumulative delay that compounds by the hour. By December 18th at 3 in the afternoon, the race for Bastogne reaches its critical moment. The 101st Airborne Division, racing east from rest areas in France, approaches the town from the west. German armored spearheads approach from the east. Both forces are converging on the same road intersection. The Americans arrive first by approximately 6 hours, the entire margin between Bastogne holding or falling without a fight. The paratroopers roll through the town center, deploy in defensive positions on the eastern perimeter, and barely have time to dig foxholes before German tanks appear on the horizon. If the 101st Convoy had been delayed by weather, by fuel shortages, by any of the 1,000 things that can slow military movement, Bastogne falls. The German advance continues unimpeded, but they weren't delayed. They arrived with hours to spare, and that 6-hour margin transforms Bastogne from a German objective into an American strongpoint. The pattern repeats at St. Vith, where the 7th Armored Division arrives just ahead of German encirclement. It repeats at Malmedy, where engineers establish defenses before German infantry reaches the town. It repeats at a dozen smaller crossroads, where American units win races they barely knew they were running. In each case, the margin is measured in hours, sometimes minutes. And in each case, the result is the same. German momentum slows, German timetables slip, German fuel consumption increases, while territorial gains decrease. The roads and crossroads of the Ardennes, these insignificant intersections in forgotten villages, become the battlefield's decisive terrain. Not because of dramatic fighting, though there will be plenty of that, but because geography and timing intersect to create situations where small American forces can delay massive German formations simply by existing in the right place at the right time. Sometimes in war, being there matters more than what you do when you arrive. December 16th, 1944, 6:30 in the morning. The men of the 106th Infantry Division wake to the sound of artillery that seems to come from every direction at once. They've been on the front line for exactly 5 days, assigned to what everyone called the quiet sector, a place where green divisions could learn the basics of combat without facing serious German resistance. The division arrived from the United States in early December, landed in France, moved to Belgium, and took over positions on a forested ridge called the Schnee Eifel. The name means snow mountain in German, though it's barely a hill by American standards, just a long wooded spine running north to south, dotted with pillboxes left over from Germany's pre-war Siegfried Line fortifications. The 106th's 2 assault regiments, the 422nd and 423rd, hold an 8-mile front along this ridge. Behind them, supporting artillery, to their flanks, other American units extending the line north and south. It looks secure on situation maps, but situation maps don't show what's about to happen. The German 5th Panzer Army hits the Schnee Eifel from 3 sides simultaneously. Volksgrenadier divisions attack from the east, the obvious direction, but other forces sweep around both flanks, driving deep into the American rear. The 106th's flanking units, the 99th Division to the north, the 28th Division to the south, collapse under the assault, falling back in fighting retreat or simply disintegrating. By noon on December 16th, the situation map shows a nightmare developing. The Schnee Eifel has become a salient, a bulge jutting into German-controlled territory, connected to American lines by a single road that's under artillery fire. 8,000 American soldiers, 2 full regiments plus supporting units, are in danger of encirclement. Division Commander Major General Alan Jones requests permission to withdraw his forward units while the route is still open. Permission denied. Higher headquarters doesn't yet understand the offensive scale. They think this is a local attack, that German forces will be stopped, that withdrawal would surrender terrain for no reason. Hold your positions, the order comes back. Reinforcements are coming. Reinforcements aren't coming. By 4 in the afternoon on December 17th, 34 hours into the offensive, German forces have closed the ring. The Schnee Eifel is completely surrounded. 8,000 Americans hold a forested ridgeline with German divisions on all sides. Their supply line is cut. Their communications are sporadic, dependent on radio batteries that won't last more than a few days. They have perhaps 3 days of food and ammunition if rationed carefully. The weather is deteriorating, snow falling, temperatures dropping below freezing, cloud ceiling so low that air resupply is impossible, even if aircraft were available. Division headquarters, located in St. Vith behind the lines, is itself under attack and will soon be overrun. The 2 regimental commanders on the Schnee Eifel, Colonel George Deschenaux of the 422nd and Colonel Charles Cavender of the 423rd, confer by radio and reach the same conclusion. They're on their own. For 2 days, the surrounded regiments fight a static defense that grows increasingly hopeless with each passing hour. German artillery pounds their positions continuously. Infantry probes test the perimeter, looking for weak points. At night, loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals in English, promising hot food and medical care for prisoners, warning that resistance will only lead to annihilation. The Americans don't respond to the broadcasts, but they also don't have many options. Breakout attempts on December 17th are repulsed with heavy losses. An airdrop is requested, planned, and then canceled when weather closes in. A relief column from St. Vith advances 3 miles before being stopped by German tanks. By December 18th, soldiers on the Schnee Eifel are eating 1 meal per day, firing their weapons only when absolutely necessary to conserve ammunition, and beginning to understand that rescue isn't coming. Colonel Cavender spends December 18th trying to reach any higher headquarters that can provide orders, guidance, or even acknowledgement. His radio operator makes contact with St. Vith and reports the regiment's dire situation. The response is static-filled and incomplete. Do what you think best. Cannot send help. Cavender asks for clarification. No response. He tries again an hour later. The frequency is dead. St. Vith has either been overrun or evacuated. The 423rd Regiment is now completely cut off from the American chain of command. That night, Cavender assembles his battalion commanders and lays out the situation with brutal honesty. They have ammunition for perhaps 1 more day of fighting, food for maybe 2 days on starvation rations, no prospect of resupply nor relief. Casualties are mounting, wounded men suffering without medical supplies. They can attempt a breakout, which will likely result in the regiment being destroyed piecemeal during the withdrawal. Or they can surrender. Nobody wants to say the word, but it hangs in the frozen air like the breath from their mouths. December 19th, 2 in the afternoon. Colonel Deschenaux and Colonel Cavender make contact one final time, comparing situations, hoping one of them has better options than the other. Neither does. Deschenaux's 422nd Regiment is down to 100 rounds of artillery ammunition. Cavender's 423rd has perhaps 2 clips per rifleman. Both regiments have several hundred wounded who cannot be evacuated and will die if left behind during a breakout attempt. The decision they face isn't whether to surrender. That's already been made by circumstances beyond their control. The decision is whether to formally surrender the regiments or to tell individual soldiers they're released from command and can attempt to escape on their own. Deschenaux argues for formal surrender, believing it will ensure the wounded receive medical care. Cavender reluctantly agrees. At 2:30, white flags appear along the Schnee Eifel perimeter. The surrender unfolds over several hours as German troops carefully approach American positions, wary of tricks, collecting weapons, and organizing prisoners into columns. The final count will be disputed for years. Different sources give different numbers, but the best evidence suggests 7,001 American soldiers march into captivity from the Schnee Eifel on December 19, 1944. It's the largest mass surrender of American forces in the European theater, exceeding even the disaster at Kasserine Pass in North Africa. For comparison, approximately 12,000 Americans surrendered at Bastogne in the Pacific, making the Schnee Eifel the second largest U.S. Army surrender of the entire war. The men file past their German captors in long columns, disarmed and dejected, beginning a journey to prison camps that some will not survive. The fate of these prisoners varies enormously. Most are eventually concentrated in Stalag 9B near Bad Orb, a camp designed to hold 4,000 men that will swell to more than 20,000 by January. Conditions deteriorate rapidly. Food rations drop to starvation levels, watery soup and a few hundred grams of bread per day. Shelter is inadequate for a German winter. Medical care is almost non-existent. Disease spreads through the overcrowded barracks. By the time American forces liberate the camps in April 1945, approximately 9% of the Bulge prisoners have died in captivity, a mortality rate 9 times higher than for American POWs captured earlier in the war, when German logistics could still support prison populations. The survivors will come home gaunt and traumatized, many carrying physical and psychological scars that last decades. The surrender at Schnee-Eifel receives minimal press coverage in the United States. The same newspapers that will make the defense of Bastogne into an epic of American courage barely mention that 2 entire regiments disappeared into German captivity. Part of the silence is operational security. The War Department doesn't want to publicize disasters while the battle is ongoing. Part is deliberate narrative management. The story of American triumph is easier to sell than stories of defeat. But mostly, the Schnee-Eifel gets forgotten because it happens simultaneously with more dramatic events elsewhere. While Deschenaux and Cavender are surrendering their regiments, Bastogne is being surrounded, Piper is racing toward the Meuse, Patton is planning his counterattack. The Schnee-Eifel becomes a footnote, a tragic sideshow to the main event. The 7,000 men who surrendered there might disagree about which events mattered more. Years later, historians will debate whether the Schnee-Eifel regiments could have escaped if they'd acted faster, withdrawn sooner, broken out before the encirclement was complete. The evidence suggests probably not. German forces closed the ring quickly and in overwhelming strength. Attempts to break out on December 17th failed catastrophically. The terrain favored defenders, meaning any withdrawal would have to fight through prepared German positions while under artillery fire. The likelihood that 8,000 men could have extracted themselves from that trap without heavy casualties approaches zero. What remains controversial is why the regiments were left on the Schnee-Eifel after encirclement became obvious. Why wasn't permission to withdraw granted on December 16th when routes were still open? Why was relief promised but never delivered? Why were these men sacrificed while other positions were evacuated? The questions linger, unanswered and uncomfortable. Reminder that in the chaos of the Bulge's first 72 hours, not every decision was correct and not every soldier was saved. December 15th, 1944, 11 at night. Deep in a command bunker near the German town of Bad Münstereifel, logistics officers from the 5th Panzer Army conduct a final review of supply calculations before the offensive begins. The numbers on their clipboards tell a story that nobody wants to acknowledge. Total fuel reserves available for the operation. Approximately 5 million gallons, enough for 5 days of combat operations at planned consumption rates. Distance to primary objective at Antwerp, 125 miles from the start line. Fuel required to reach Antwerp and sustain combat operations there, approximately 50 million gallons. The math is simple and inescapable. They have 10% of the fuel they need. The offensive depends entirely on capturing American fuel supplies within the first 48 hours. If those captures don't happen, the entire operation grinds to a halt somewhere in Belgium, out of gas and out of options. This isn't secret information. German commanders know their fuel situation borders on catastrophic. The Luftwaffe knows it barely has enough aviation fuel to support the offensive's opening days. Tank commanders know their Panthers and Tigers are starting with tanks that read 90% full but will drop to 50% after just 60 or 70 miles of movement. Everybody knows. And yet the offensive proceeds anyway, based on the assumption, the hope, really, that American supply discipline will break down under surprise attack, that fuel depots will fall intact, that retreating American forces will abandon supplies rather than destroy them. It's planning, based on optimism, the belief that what must happen will happen because the alternative is unthinkable. The German officers in that bunker aren't stupid, they're desperate, and desperation makes people believe in possibilities that sober analysis would reject. The American fuel storage system in the Ardennes region is extensive and vulnerable. First Army's quartermaster has established major depots at Stavelot, Spa, Malmedy, and smaller dumps scattered throughout Belgium. Total storage: approximately 2.5 million gallons of gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel. The security is minimal. These are rear area facilities protected by military police and administrative troops, not combat units. Standard procedure requires that demolition charges be prepared for all critical installations. But in practice, many dumps have no explosives pre-positioned, no destruction plans, no designated teams to execute those plans. The depots exist in a state of comfortable complacency, storing fuel for armies that have been advancing steadily for months. Nobody has seriously considered that German tanks might reach these installations. Nobody has planned for the possibility that fuel intended for American trucks could end up powering German panzers instead. December 17th, 8 in the morning. Joachim Peiper's spearhead rolls into the town of Bulge and captures an American fuel depot almost completely intact. His tankers immediately begin the laborious process of refueling their vehicles. But a problem emerges within minutes. American military fuel is primarily 80-octane gasoline, suitable for trucks and gasoline engines. German tanks run on diesel fuel or specialized synthetic fuels. The compatibility is limited. Peiper's Panthers and Mark IVs can use captured gasoline with modification and reduced performance. His King Tigers cannot. Their engines require diesel, or they'll destroy themselves. Of the 50,000 gallons captured at Bulge, Peiper can use perhaps 8% effectively. It's better than nothing, but it's nowhere near what the operational plan assumed. The tankers pump what they can into compatible vehicles and destroy the rest. Peiper's column moves on, still chronically short of fuel. The pattern repeats throughout the first 72 hours. German units overrun small American fuel dumps and find them either evacuated, destroyed, or filled with incompatible fuel types. The massive depot at Stavelot, containing hundreds of thousands of gallons, is evacuated by American engineers beginning on December 17th. They work through the night, loading fuel onto trucks, driving west ahead of Peiper's advance. What can't be moved is set afire. When Peiper's lead elements reach Stavelot on December 18th, they find burning storage tanks and empty drums. The depot at Spa suffers the same fate. 2 million gallons removed or destroyed in frantic overnight operations. Peiper's desperate radio messages to higher headquarters reflect his growing panic. Without captured fuel, his offensive capability is measured in hours, not days. By December 18th, the German fuel crisis has become critical across the entire front. The 2nd Panzer Division, which has advanced farther west than any other German unit, reports fuel supplies at 15% capacity. The division literally coasts downhill, with engines off to conserve fuel, fires up engines only for climbs and combat. The 116th Panzer Division halts its advance 15 miles from the Meuse River Bridge at Dinant, not because of enemy resistance, but because every vehicle is running on fumes. Commanders radio desperate requests for fuel deliveries. Luftwaffe transport aircraft attempt supply runs, but most are shot down by Allied fighters or can't land, because suitable airfields are still in American hands. Horse-drawn wagons, the same logistics system the German army used in the First World War, bring forward limited quantities of fuel, but it's like emptying an ocean with a teaspoon. The mathematics of the fuel shortage are brutal and unforgiving. Germany's synthetic fuel production in December 1944 totals approximately 12 million gallons per month for all military services: Army, Air Force, Navy. The Ardennes offensive consumed approximately 2 million gallons in the first 72 hours, nearly 20% of monthly production in just 3 days. At that rate of consumption, German strategic reserves will be exhausted in 2 weeks, but the offensive can't sustain that consumption rate because there isn't enough fuel to sustain it. It's a closed loop of impossibility. The army needs fuel to capture fuel dumps, but they can't reach the dumps without fuel. Every hour of operation consumes resources that cannot be replaced. Every mile advanced increases the distance to German supply bases and decreases the remaining range to objective. The offensive is eating itself. Tank abandonment rates tell the story in stark terms. Of the 1,400 tanks and assault guns that start the offensive on December 16th, approximately 600 are immobilized by December 19th. Not from battle damage, but from fuel exhaustion. Crews drain every drop from their tanks, sometimes siphoning fuel from one vehicle to get another moving. Horses are hitched to dead tanks to tow them into defensive positions where they can serve as stationary pillboxes. But most are simply abandoned, left beside roads with turrets traversed to the rear to indicate they're out of action. Crew personal equipment scattered around them. American forces advancing later in the campaign will find these ghost columns, perfectly functional tanks sitting empty because they had no fuel to move. It's mechanized warfare reduced to immobility by a spreadsheet error. The Luftwaffe's participation in the offensive highlights the fuel crisis from a different angle. Air planners allocate enough aviation fuel for approximately 2,000 sorties during the operation's first week. 2,000 sorties sounds substantial until you compare it to Allied capabilities. The Allied air forces in Western Europe can generate 20,000 sorties per week when weather permits. German pilots are outnumbered 10-1 in the skies, and they know it. Luftwaffe attacks on December 17th and 18th achieve local successes, destroying some vehicles, disrupting some convoys. But Allied fighters swarm any German aircraft that appears. Within 3 days, the Luftwaffe withdraws from daylight operations entirely, conserving remaining fuel for defensive operations over Germany itself. The Ardennes offensive receives no meaningful air support after December 19th, leaving German ground forces completely exposed to Allied air attack once the weather clears. December 19th, 2 in the afternoon. German 6th Panzer Army commander Joseph Sepp Dietrich receives updated logistics reports and realizes the offensive has failed, even though fighting will continue for weeks. His armored spearheads have penetrated 30 miles into American lines, but consumed 80% of their fuel allocation. The rate of advance is slowing daily. Captured fuel has proven inadequate. Resupply from Germany is impossible under Allied air attack. Dietrich does the math and understands what it means. His army can fight where it stands, trading space for casualties, but it cannot advance farther. The Meuse River, still 20 miles away, might as well be on the moon. Antwerp, the operation's ultimate objective, is completely out of reach. The ghost of adequate fuel supplies, the assumption that carried the offensive through planning and execution, has proven to be exactly that, a ghost. And you can't run tanks on wishful thinking. December 17th, 1944, 8 in the evening. At Camp Mourmelon in eastern France, the men of the 101st Airborne Division are scattered across a muddy cantonment area, enjoying their first extended rest since Operation Market Garden in September. Some are in town on pass, drinking in cafes, flirting with French women. Some are sleeping for the first time in weeks without wearing boots and helmets. Some are playing cards, writing letters home, trading cigarettes for whatever luxuries the French black market offers. The division is at approximately 70% strength, 3,000 men short after 2 months of brutal combat in Holland. Equipment is worn out, needs replacement. Morale is good, but brittle, the kind of tired good humor that comes from surviving operations you shouldn't have survived. Nobody expects to move out anytime soon. Winter is coming. Surely the army will let them rest through Christmas. Surely they've earned at least that much. At 8:15, whistles blow across the camp. Assembly. Move out in 30 minutes. Full combat load. The orders come down through company. Commanders who know almost nothing except that this is urgent, this is real, and everybody moves right now. The destination? Bastogne, Belgium, 107 miles northeast. The mission? Defend the town against German forces reported approaching from multiple directions. The timeline? Arrive before the Germans or Bastogne falls without a fight. Men stumble out of barracks, grab weapons and equipment, form up in the darkness beside hundreds of trucks that appeared seemingly from nowhere. Some soldiers are so drunk they can barely walk. Some are still in town and will miss the convoy entirely, showing up days later after hitchhiking toward the sound of gunfire. The 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, is going back to war ready or not. The convoy races through the night on icy roads, headlights blacked out, drivers navigating by moonlight and instinct. They pass American units moving west in retreat, battered formations that have been fighting for 2 days and look like they've been through a meat grinder. They pass civilians fleeing east with whatever possessions they can carry, refugees who've seen this before in 1940 and know what German occupation means. They pass burning vehicles, abandoned equipment, all the detritus of an army that's been surprised and forced to give ground. The paratroopers in the trucks don't talk much. They're veterans. They can read a battlefield. Whatever they're driving toward isn't good, but orders are orders, and the 101st goes where it's told. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the division while the commanding general is away in the States, arrives in Bastogne at 9 on the morning of December 18th and immediately realizes the situation is far worse than briefed. The town is chaos. Retreating American units stream through the streets, some organized, some just soldiers who've lost their units and are trying to find friendly lines. Military police are setting up roadblocks, trying to sort order from disorder. Belgian civilians are evacuating in the opposite direction, creating traffic jams at every intersection. And from the east come reports that German armor is less than 10 miles away, approaching fast. McAuliffe establishes his command post in a Belgian army barracks on the edge of town and demands a situation briefing. What he hears isn't encouraging. 8th Corps headquarters has evacuated Bastogne. 1st Army has lost contact with multiple divisions. German forces of unknown size and composition are converging on the town from 3 directions. The 101st is the only significant American force within 20 miles. Welcome to Bastogne, General. It's all yours. The paratroopers deploy around the town's perimeter through December 18th and 19th, occupying a 16-mile defensive line that's far too long for a single division. They're joined by remnants of other units, elements of the 9th and 10th Armored, divisions, a tank destroyer battalion, some artillery units, stragglers from combat engineer companies. McAuliffe cobbles together a defense from whatever forces he has, plugging the most likely German approach routes, accepting that gaps will exist because there aren't enough men to cover everything. The paratroopers dig foxholes in frozen ground, string communication wire, register artillery, all the preparations that infantry has done for centuries before battle. But they're missing something critical. They're paratroopers, designed for short-duration airborne assaults, not extended defensive operations. They don't have the heavy weapons, the extensive ammunition stocks, the robust logistics that make static defense sustainable. The 101st is built for 72 hours of combat. After that, they need resupply or withdrawal. Neither is likely. December 19th, 11 in the morning, German forces complete the encirclement of Bastogne. Roads leading north, south, east, and west are all cut, either physically occupied by German troops or, under such heavy fire, that movement is suicide. The 101st Airborne Division, along with approximately 6,000 other American soldiers from various units, is now completely surrounded. Total defending force, approximately 11,000 men. Total attacking force, elements of 3 German divisions, approximately 45,000 men with armor and artillery support. The mathematics are ugly. McAuliffe receives reports of the encirclement with characteristic calm and begins planning for siege operations. Food will be rationed immediately. Ammunition expenditure will be controlled. Fuel for vehicles will be conserved for emergencies only. The wounded will receive whatever medical care is possible with available supplies. And everybody will hold their positions. No retreat, no surrender. Bastogne holds until relieved or until there's nothing left to hold it with. The German siege of Bastogne follows a predictable pattern. Artillery pounds the town continuously, forcing defenders to stay in their holes, disrupting supply operations, grinding down morale. Infantry attacks probe the perimeter, testing for weak points, trying to identify where the line might break. Armor demonstrations threaten breakthrough without committing to full assault, keeping defenders nervous and burning ammunition. It's methodical and professional, the kind of siege warfare at which the Wehrmacht excels. But it's also slow, far slower than the German timetable allows. Bastogne was supposed to fall on December 19th, opening the road network for German logistics. When it doesn't fall, the German advance stalls. Supply columns can't use the roads through Bastogne. Armored divisions can't bypass the town because all alternate routes are blocked by terrain or American forces. The entire southern wing of the German offensive backs up behind Bastogne like traffic behind a jackknifed truck. December 20th, 6 in the morning. McAuliffe's headquarters receives a remarkable message, delivered under flag of truce by German officers. It's a formal surrender demand, typed on good paper, professionally presented. The message explains that Bastogne is surrounded, that resistance is futile, that American forces face annihilation if they continue fighting. It offers honorable surrender terms. Officers keep their sidearms, wounded receive medical care, all prisoners will be treated according to Geneva Convention. It concludes with a deadline, 2 hours to decide. McAuliffe reads the message, considers it for perhaps 30 seconds, and delivers his response to the staff officers who will draft the formal reply. The response is a single word: nuts. The staff officers aren't sure if he's joking. McAuliffe clarifies, that's the official response. The Germans want an answer. Give them that answer. Nuts. One word. No explanation, no elaboration. Send it. The German officers who receive McAuliffe's response are genuinely confused. Nuts? They ask the American colonel who delivers the message. What does this mean? Is it affirmative or negative? The colonel, Colonel Joseph Harper of the 327th Glider Infantry, explains in clear terms, it means go to hell. The German officers nod, salute, and depart. Within hours, McAuliffe's one-word response has spread through the American lines, then to headquarters, then to war correspondents who recognize pure gold when they see it. Nuts becomes the battle cry of Bastogne, the defiant single word that captures American refusal to quit even when surrounded and outnumbered. It's brilliant public relations, exactly the kind of quotable moment that newspaper editors love. But more importantly, it stiffens the resolve of soldiers in the foxholes who hear that their general responded to a surrender demand with a one-word insult. If McAuliffe isn't worried, maybe they shouldn't be either. The reality inside Bastogne is less heroic than press accounts will suggest. Men are cold, hungry, and increasingly desperate. Ammunition is running critically low for some units. The wounded overwhelm medical facilities that lack basic supplies. Artillery fire kills soldiers every day, random and impersonal. German loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals in English, promising hot food and warm shelter, wearing on men whose rations have been cut to 1 meal per day. Some soldiers crack under the pressure, requiring evacuation to rear areas that don't exist. Some desert their positions at night, disappearing into the town or attempting to slip through German lines. Most stay and fight because there's no alternative, because their buddies are staying and fighting, because surrender to an enemy that murdered prisoners at Malmedy seems like choosing one death over another. The defense of Bastogne is heroic. It's also miserable, terrifying, and sustained by the thinnest margin between holding and collapse. December 22nd changes everything. The weather clears. For the first time in a week, cloud ceilings lift above 3,000 feet, allowing Allied aircraft to operate. At 9 in the morning, soldiers in Bastogne hear aircraft engines and look up to see C-47 transport planes circling the town. Cargo doors open, preparing to drop supplies. Parachutes blossom across the sky, red, blue, yellow, white, hundreds of them, drifting down carrying ammunition, medical supplies, food, fuel. The paratroopers cheer, firing their weapons in the air, momentarily forgetting the Germans surrounding them. The airdrop delivers 334 tons of supplies, approximately 95% of which lands inside American lines. It's not enough to end the siege, but it's enough to sustain it. Bastogne will hold through Christmas, through New Year, as long as the weather permits aerial resupply, and as long as soldiers in those foxholes refuse to quit. And thanks to one general's one-word response, quitting is the last thing anyone intends to do. December 17th, 1944, 10:30 in the morning. The lead elements of the 7th Armored Division crawl east along roads clogged with refugees, retreating American units, and destroyed vehicles. They've been traveling for 72 hours from rest areas in Holland, racing toward a Belgian town called St. Vith that most soldiers can't pronounce and none have ever seen. The column moves at walking pace when it moves at all, frequently stopped by traffic jams, by broken-down trucks blocking narrow roads, by military police trying to maintain some semblance of order in the chaos. Tank crews stand in their turrets watching American infantry stream past in the opposite direction, exhausted men who've been fighting since December 16th and look like they've lost. Nobody needs to ask how the battle is going. The evidence is all around them. Brigadier General Bruce Clark arrives in St. Vith at 2 in the afternoon and receives the mission that will define his military career. Defend this town, hold this crossroads, buy time for other forces to establish positions to the west. How long? As long as possible. With what forces? Whatever arrives. Clark, a 38-year-old combat engineer who's never commanded an armored division in battle, looks at the situation map and understands immediately that he's been given an impossible task. St. Vith sits in a shallow valley where 5 roads converge. The Germans need those roads to move their logistics forward, to sustain their offensive. They'll hit this town with everything they have, and Clark's defending it with 3 combat commands from the 7th Armored, maybe 9,000 men total, 200 tanks, and whatever artillery he can scrape together from retreating units. Against him, 2 German divisions reported approaching, possibly more, with total strength estimated at 30,000 men. The math doesn't work, but sometimes you defend anyway. The 7th Armored deploys around St. Vith in a hasty perimeter defense that military instructors would recognize from textbooks. Tanks positioned on high ground with good fields of fire, infantry in the low areas to screen against infiltration, artillery registered on likely approach routes, command post established in a stone building in the town citadel with communication lines to all sectors, engineer detachments preparing key bridges for demolition. It's professional work executed by tired men who've been driving for 3 days and immediately thrown into defensive positions without rest. But they're veterans, survivors of North Africa and Sicily and Normandy. They know what they're doing. They establish fields of fire, coordinate between units, prepare fallback positions in case the main line breaks. By nightfall on December 17th, St. Vith is as ready as a hastily organized defense can be. The German assault begins at dawn on December 18th with an artillery barrage that turns the eastern approaches to St. Vith into a moonscape of shell craters and shattered trees. The bombardment lifts at 8 in the morning, and infantry emerges from the forest in assault formation, supported by tanks and assault guns. They hit the American perimeter at multiple points simultaneously, testing for weaknesses, probing for gaps. The 7th Armored fires everything it has: tank guns, artillery, mortars, small arms. The noise is indescribable. Men shout to communicate even when standing 3 feet apart. Smoke drifts across the battlefield, mixing with morning fog to create visibility measured in yards. German and American tanks trade shots at ranges so close that misses are impossible. Infantry fights from foxholes and building rubble, and slowly, inexorably, the American line holds. Clark's command post receives fragmentary reports throughout the day that paint a picture of savage close-quarters combat. Company A, 38th Armored Infantry, reports 12 German tanks destroyed, 2 American tanks lost. Company B reports a penetration that was sealed by counterattack. 3rd Battalion, 23rd Armored, reports they're down to 60% strength, but holding positions. The reports are professional and understated, which makes the underlying reality worse. 60% strength means 4 soldiers out of 10 are casualties. Holding positions means fighting from the same foxholes they occupied this morning, which means they haven't been overrun, but also haven't gained ground. This is attrition warfare, trading casualties for time, burning through men and equipment to delay German forces for hours or days, but not stop them. December 19th brings heavier attacks as more German divisions arrive and commit to the assault. The 18th Volksgrenadier Division hammers the northern sector. The 62nd Volksgrenadier Division attacks from the east. Elements of the 9th SS Panzer Division probe the southern approaches. Clark's defenders are now facing parts of 3 divisions, approximately 30,000 Germans against 9,000 Americans. The perimeter shrinks as outlying positions are overrun or withdrawn under pressure. By evening, the defense is contracted to a tight semicircle around St. Vith itself, maybe 4 miles across, held by soldiers who haven't slept in 72 hours and are running on adrenaline and terror. Ammunition is running low. Artillery batteries fire their last shells, then displace to the rear or are overrun. Tank crews fight until their vehicles are destroyed or immobilized, then join infantry units as riflemen. The defense is consuming itself, burning men and material at a rate that cannot be sustained. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, now commanding all Allied forces north of the German breakthrough, reviews the situation at St. Vith on December 21st and makes a cold calculation. The 7th Armored has held for 4 days, far longer than anyone expected. But they're surrounded on 3 sides, their supply line is under constant attack, and they've suffered approximately 59% casualties. The division has done its job, delayed German forces long enough for defenses to be established farther west. Continuing to hold St. Vith serves no purpose except getting the rest of the 7th Armored killed or captured. Montgomery issues the order that Clark has been expecting and dreading: withdraw tonight, break contact. Save what forces can be saved. St. Vith is not worth the complete destruction of an armored division. The withdrawal from St. Vith on the night of December 21st is a nightmare of military movement under fire. Units disengage in sequence, rear guard covering each successive withdrawal, communication difficult in darkness and confusion. German forces detect the movement and increase pressure, trying to turn the withdrawal into a rout. Artillery fire walks through the retreating columns. Infantry ambushes hit stragglers. Tank duels flare in village streets as German armor tries to cut off escape routes. But the 7th Armored maintains cohesion, fighting through roadblocks, carrying their wounded, destroying equipment that can't be evacuated. By dawn on December 22nd, the last American forces have cleared St. Vith and established new defensive positions 5 miles west. Behind them, German troops occupy the smoldering ruins of a town that was supposed to fall on December 17th. They're 6 days behind schedule. The cost of defending St. Vith is staggering. The 7th Armored Division goes into the battle with 9,000 men and emerges with fewer than 4,000 combat effectives. Tank strength drops from 200 vehicles to 82 operational. Artillery battalions are reduced to a handful of guns. Support units cease to exist as coherent organizations. The division needs complete reconstitution before it can fight again, a process that will take weeks. But those 6 days of delay matter more than the casualties. The German 5th Panzer Army's entire logistics system backed up behind St. Vith, unable to use the road network, forced to find alternate routes through terrible terrain. Divisions that should have been at the Meuse River on December 19th are still fighting for a Belgian market town on December 21st. The offensive has lost momentum it will never recover. Historical accounts of the Battle of the Bulge give St. Vith approximately 5% of the coverage devoted to Bastogne. There's no dramatic one-word response to a surrender demand, no airborne division parachutes as visual symbolism, no siege that continues through Christmas. St. Vith is just soldiers fighting and dying in a town that most people can't locate on a map, holding long enough to disrupt German plans, then withdrawing before being completely destroyed. It's professional soldiering without glory, sacrifice without recognition. The 7th Armored receives a Distinguished Unit Citation for its defense of St. Vith, a piece of paper and a ribbon. The men who fought there receive the knowledge that they accomplished their mission, which is cold comfort when half your friends are dead or missing. But military history isn't about glory. It's about effectiveness. And by that measure, the forgotten stand at St. Vith matters as much as any action in the entire Ardennes campaign. December 19th, 1944. 9 in the morning. In a converted military barracks in the city of Verdun, France, the senior Allied commanders in Western Europe gather for an emergency conference. Eisenhower has called this meeting to coordinate the response to the German offensive, to settle command disputes, to ensure everyone understands the plan. The mood is tense. Bradley is angry about losing control of First Army to Montgomery. Montgomery is cautious about committing British reserves to what he considers an American problem. Patton sits quietly in the corner, smoking, watching, waiting. When Eisenhower asks how soon Third Army can attack north into the German southern flank, Patton delivers an answer that seems impossible. December 22nd, 3 days. Eisenhower, who knows Patton's tendency toward aggressive optimism, asks for clarification. Can you really attack in 72 hours, or is this wishful thinking? Patton is unambiguous. I can attack with 3 divisions on December 22nd. The room goes silent. Everyone present understands what Patton is promising. What nobody except Patton and his staff know is that Third Army has been planning this pivot since December 17th, before official orders, before the Verdun Conference, before anyone in authority told them to prepare. Patton's chief of staff, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, began wargaming a 90-degree pivot on the evening of December 16th when first reports of the German offensive reached 3rd Army headquarters. Gay assembled planners and posed a hypothetical. If we need to disengage from current operations, turn north, and attack into the Ardennes, how would we do it? The staff worked through the night, developing 3 contingency plans with different force levels and timelines. Operation Nickel: attack with 3 divisions in 3 days. Operation Trouble: attack with 4 divisions in 4 days. Operation Pestered: attack with 6 divisions in 1 week. When Patton arrives at the Verdun conference, he has complete operational plans in his briefcase, ready to execute on order. The scale of what Patton is proposing is difficult to comprehend. Third Army consists of approximately 250,000 men, organized into 8 divisions, 4 independent tank battalions, dozens of artillery units, and the enormous logistics tail required to sustain offensive operations. These forces are currently deployed along a 100-mile front in eastern France and Luxembourg, engaged in active combat operations against German defensive positions. To execute the pivot, Patton must simultaneously disengage from current operations without alerting German forces that he's withdrawing, shift his entire army 90 degrees north, move divisions and their supporting units 75 miles or more through winter weather on icy roads, and attack into the southern flank of the German Bulge while maintaining supply lines that now run perpendicular to the front. Military doctrine suggests this maneuver requires 2 weeks minimum. Patton promises 3 days. The mechanics of the pivot begin within hours of the Verdun conference. Third Army issues movement orders to 8 divisions, 4 corps headquarters, and supporting units numbering approximately 133,000 men for the initial assault waves. The 80th Infantry Division will move from the Saar region to Luxembourg, approximately 80 miles. The 26th Infantry Division will shift from Metz to Arlon, 75 miles. The 4th Armored Division, currently in reserve near Nancy, will move 100 miles north to become the spearhead of the relief attack toward Bastogne. Each division has prescribed routes, march schedules, and objectives. Corps siege artillery must displace from firing positions, move north, and re-establish in new positions ready to support the attack. Tank destroyer battalions, engineer units, signal companies, medical battalions, all must move in coordination without creating traffic jams that would stall the entire operation. The road network becomes the critical constraint. Third Army has 3 primary routes north, roughly parallel roads running from France and Luxembourg toward Belgium. The western route carries the 4th Armored Division and supporting units. The center route carries the 80th Infantry Division. The eastern route carries the 26th Infantry Division. Traffic control is managed by military police positioned at every major intersection, routing columns, preventing conflicts, keeping everything moving. The weather is terrible, temperatures below freezing, icy roads, snow falling intermittently. Trucks slide off roads into ditches. Tank tracks lose traction on hills. Breakdowns occur constantly. Recovery vehicles work around the clock to clear disabled equipment. But the columns keep moving, 18 hours per day, brief halts for refueling and feeding, then back on the road. December 20th brings the first crisis. The 4th Armored Division's lead combat command reaches the Luxembourg-Belgian border ahead of schedule, but reports that German forces have cut the main road to Bastogne. The route that intelligence said was open is actually held by German rearguard units. The division commander requests permission to halt and wait for infantry support. Patton's response is characteristic: find another road and keep moving. The 4th Armored shifts to an alternate route, narrower and in worse condition, but passable. They keep going. Time matters more than route quality. Every hour of delay means more casualties in Bastogne, more ammunition expended, more Germans reinforcing their siege lines. Patton has promised to relieve Bastogne. The 4th Armored will deliver on that promise or die trying. The logistical challenge of supporting this pivot is as complex as the tactical movement. Third Army logistics officers must redirect supply columns that were heading east to now head north. Ammunition dumps established to support operations in the Saar must be emptied and restocked closer to the new front. Fuel convoys must be rerouted. Hospitals must displace. Every element of the Army's support infrastructure must shift 90 degrees while maintaining uninterrupted supply to combat units. Third Army's quartermaster later estimates they moved approximately 50,000 tons of supplies and equipment during the pivot, everything from tank ammunition to winter boots to food for 250,000 men. Not one combat unit reports critical supply shortages during the movement. It's logistics on a scale rarely attempted and even more rarely successful. December 21st, 6 in the morning. The first elements of 3rd Army cross the start line and begin the attack north into German forces. The 80th Infantry Division hits German positions near Luxembourg City. The 26th Infantry Division attacks near Arlon. Both divisions encounter stiff resistance. These are veteran German units, well positioned, with orders to hold at all costs. The fighting is brutal and attritional, measured in hundreds of yards gained at the cost of dozens of casualties. But 3rd Army isn't trying to break through. They're trying to fix German attention, to force the enemy to commit reserves to stop this new threat, to prevent German divisions from reinforcing the siege of Bastogne. It's supporting attack, designed to create conditions for the 4th Armored's drive to succeed. December 22nd, 10 in the morning. The 4th Armored Division's lead combat command, Task Force Abrams under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, engages German forces 8 miles south of Bastogne. The Germans have prepared defenses in depth, knowing this relief attempt is coming. They're not surprised, but they are outnumbered. Abrams attacks with 30 tanks and 600 infantry in half-tracks, using mobility and firepower to overwhelm defensive positions before they can be reinforced. The advance is measured in miles per hour, not miles per day. German resistance stiffens as Abrams approaches Bastogne, every village a fortress, every hill a strong point. But 3rd Army artillery is firing in support now, thousands of rounds walking ahead of the advance, suppressing German positions. Close air support has returned with the clearing weather, P-47 Thunderbolts, diving on German tanks and artillery. The Germans are being squeezed between two forces, the 101st Airborne defending Bastogne and 3rd Army attacking from the south. Patton's war diary for December 22nd records his satisfaction with the operation's execution. Began the attack on schedule with 3 divisions. Enemy resistance is heavy, but we are advancing. The entry is matter of fact, almost understated. It doesn't capture the extraordinary nature of what 3rd Army has accomplished. In 72 hours, Patton has disengaged from one offensive, pivoted his entire army 90 degrees, moved 250,000 men and 50,000 vehicles across terrible terrain in worse weather, and attacked into the flank of the most powerful German offensive since 1940. Contemporary military analysts considered it impossible. Soviet observers studying the operation after the war concluded it was the most impressive example of operational maneuver by any army during the entire conflict. Patton later described it simply, "We did what we said we'd do. In war, that's everything." December 17th, 1944, 2 in the afternoon. Captain James Gamble of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion receives orders that transform his unit from construction workers into frontline infantry. The Germans have broken through. Armored columns are approaching. Someone needs to hold the town of Malmedy until reinforcements arrive. The 51st Engineers are already deploying. The 291st will establish a second defensive line. Gamble's entire military career has been about building things: bridges, roads, airfields. His men are trained to operate bulldozers and jackhammers. They've never received infantry tactics training. They don't have infantry weapons. Their tables of organization and equipment assume they'll work behind the lines, protected by combat units. Now they're the combat units, ordered to defend a Belgian town against SS panzers with whatever they can improvise. The CU 291st deploys around Malmedy with a motley collection of weapons that would horrify an infantry battalion commander. Carbines, the light rifles issued to support troops for self-defense, accurate to maybe 200 yards on a good day. A few Browning automatic rifles scrounged from retreating units. 2 30-caliber machine guns liberated from a destroyed supply convoy. And explosives, lots of explosives, because engineers always have demolition charges. Gamble establishes a perimeter using terrain features as defensive lines. The Amblev River protects the north. A railroad embankment provides cover to the south. The center is just open ground that his men will have to cover with direct fire. He positions his limited machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire, assigns rifle squads to likely German approach routes, and prepares explosives to blow stone buildings if defensive positions need to be created in rubble. It's improvisation elevated to art. making do with what exists because what's needed doesn't exist. The German assault on Malmedy begins on December 18th with reconnaissance elements probing for weaknesses, followed by concentrated artillery fire, then infantry attacks supported by armor. The engineers fight like infantry, mechanized infantry, whatever they need to be. They fire their carbines until barrels overheat. They throw demolition charges at German tanks like oversized hand grenades, occasionally destroying a vehicle, more often just forcing armor to back off and find different routes. They shoot at anything German, conserve ammunition when possible, and call artillery support from batteries positioned west of the town. The fighting lasts for hours, attacks and counterattacks, Germans pushing forward and engineers pushing back, neither side gaining decisive advantage. What the engineers accomplish through sheer stubbornness is buying time. Every hour Malmedy holds is another hour for armor reinforcements to arrive from reserve positions. Every German casualty is one fewer soldier available to attack Bastogne or St. Vith. Every tank damaged or destroyed reduces German offensive capability. The engineers understand this intellectually, though in the moment they're mostly focused on not dying. They hold the perimeter through December 18th. They hold through December 19th. By December 20th, the 30th Infantry Division has arrived and taken over the defense, allowing the exhausted engineers to withdraw to rear areas. Of the 750 men in the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, 510 are casualties, 68%. They have been in sustained combat for 3 days, which is approximately 72 hours longer than their training prepared them for. But they held. At Trois Ponts, the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion faces a different challenge, demolishing bridges while German tanks approach. Engineer doctrine requires approximately 4 hours to properly prepare a bridge for demolition, calculating charge placement, drilling holes for explosives, running detonation lines, establishing safe firing positions. The 51st has minutes, not hours. They place charges wherever they can, use whatever explosives are available, and accept that some demolitions will be imperfect. On December 18th, they blow 3 bridges in front of Kampfgruppe Piper's advance, forcing the German column to detour and buying critical hours. The cost is 65% casualties over the next 4 days as German forces attempt to secure alternate crossing points and engineers fight as infantry to prevent it. The pattern repeats across the Ardennes. The 158th Engineer Combat Battalion builds 14 miles of corduroy road through dense forest in 36 hours, creating supply routes that allow American forces to move where German planners assumed movement was impossible. They work under artillery fire, in freezing temperatures, without adequate equipment, 71% casualties. The 168th Engineers construct an emergency bridge across the Somme River at Ville-Somme, allowing the 7th Armored Division to withdraw from St. Vith while under fire. The bridge is designed to support 10 tons. They run 70-ton tanks across it because there's no alternative. The bridge holds. 65% casualties among the engineers who built it, while German mortars bracketed the worksite. The casualty rates among engineer battalions in the first 72 hours exceed those of many infantry units that were actually engaged in sustained combat. The 158th Engineers, 71%. The 291st Engineers, 68%. The 51st Engineers, 65%. These aren't approximations. These are documented casualty figures for non-combat units that found themselves in combat because the tactical situation left no choice. And they performed. Bridges got blown when they needed to be blown. Roads got built when they needed to be built. Towns got defended when they needed to be defended. The engineers did jobs they weren't trained for, with equipment they didn't have, against enemies they weren't supposed to fight. And mostly, it worked. The bridge demolition success rate tells a remarkable story. Of 81 major bridges in the Ardennes region that were prepared for demolition, 72 were successfully destroyed before German forces could capture them intact. 9 failed for various reasons. Demolition charges failed to detonate, infantry couldn't hold long enough for engineers to complete preparations, German commandos cut detonation wires. But a 90% success rate under combat conditions, often with engineers working under direct fire, represents extraordinary professional competence. Every bridge destroyed forced German forces to find alternate routes, to expend time and fuel searching for crossings, to delay their advance by hours or days. And those cumulative delays meant the difference between German armor reaching the Meuse River and stalling 30 miles short. Road construction and maintenance during the offensive is equally impressive but receives even less recognition. Engineer battalions built or repaired 127 miles of roads during the first week of the campaign, creating supply routes, evacuation routes, and movement corridors for Allied counterattacks. Some of this work occurred under artillery fire, some occurred at night without lights to avoid enemy observation. All of it occurred in weather that made outdoor work miserable and dangerous. But supply convoys had to move, wounded had to be evacuated, and reinforcements had to reach the front. The engineers built the roads that made those movements possible, 1 mile at a time, while infantrymen received medals and tankers received headlines. The recognition gap is striking and troubling. During and after the Battle of the Bulge, infantry divisions received numerous unit citations, individual decorations, and press coverage. The 101st Airborne at Bastogne became famous worldwide. The 7th Armored at St. Vith received commendations. Various infantry units were recognized for specific actions. Engineer battalions received almost nothing. No engineer unit defending a town received a presidential unit citation, despite casualty rates that matched or exceeded those of decorated infantry units. Very few engineer officers received awards commensurate with their unit's contributions. The engineers built the roads, blew the bridges, defended the towns, and did it all with minimal recognition because their work was unglamorous and poorly understood by combat commanders. Post-war analysis by military historians gradually recognized what contemporary commanders missed. Engineer operations in the first 72 hours of the Bulge were as critical as any combat action in determining the offensive's outcome. Bridges demolished prevented German armor from exploiting breakthroughs. Roads built allowed Allied reinforcements to arrive in time to contain penetrations. Engineers fighting as infantry bought time for proper defensive lines to form. The arithmetic is simple. Remove engineer contributions from the battle, and German forces reach the Meuse River. They probably cross it. The offensive achieves at least partial success. Add engineer contributions back in, and the offensive stalls short of its objectives. That's not support work. That's combat effectiveness by a different name. The engineers won their war. They just didn't get credit for it. December 17th, 1944, 8 in the evening. In a requisition chateau outside Paris serving as Allied logistics headquarters, staff officers compile damage reports and replacement schedules that tell a story most combat commanders don't appreciate. First Army has lost approximately 300 tanks in the offensive's first 48 hours. Replacement tanks are already en route from Antwerp, arriving at forward depots within 72 hours of losses being reported. Artillery battalions report expending 2 days' worth of ammunition in 6 hours. Ammunition convoys are redirected, priorities reshuffled, and shells arrive at gun positions before batteries run dry. The German offensive has surprised Allied forces tactically, yes, but strategically, the Allies are fighting with surplus while Germany burns irreplaceable reserves. The mathematics of industrial warfare are beginning to assert themselves, and mathematics don't care about tactical brilliance or operational audacity. American war production in 1944 reaches levels that seem almost absurd when listed in raw numbers. 17,000 tanks manufactured, 96,000 aircraft, 41 billion rounds of small arms ammunition, 657,000 tons of artillery shells. The numbers are so large they lose meaning, become statistics rather than capabilities. But on the battlefield, these statistics translate into replacement rates that determine whether armies can sustain operations. An American tank destroyed on December 16th can be replaced by December 18th. An American division that suffers 20% casualties receives replacement personnel within a week. Equipment, ammunition, fuel, food, everything flows forward in quantities that allow sustained offensive operations, despite losses that would cripple less industrialized nations. Germany's production numbers tell a different story, the story of an economy stretched beyond breaking. Total tank production in 1944, 5,580 vehicles, approximately 1/3 of American output. Of those, 465 were produced in December, the month of the Ardennes offensive. The Wehrmacht enters the offensive with approximately 1,400 tanks and assault guns. By December 19th, 72 hours into the campaign, 600 of those vehicles are destroyed or abandoned. 600 vehicles represents 129% of December's total production. Germany has lost more tanks in 3 days than it can build in a month. The mathematics are unsustainable, and unsustainable operations eventually collapse regardless of how well they're executed tactically. Ammunition consumption highlights the disparity even more starkly. German artillery fires approximately 2 million shells during the opening bombardment and first 48 hours of combat. 2 million shells represents approximately 2 months of German production at December 1944 levels, when Allied bombing has degraded German industrial capacity. The Wehrmacht cannot sustain fire rates experienced in the offensive's first days. American artillery, by contrast, fires comparable shell quantities with no concern about ammunition shortages. Supply convoys bring forward more shells than can be fired. The problem isn't ammunition availability, but transportation capacity to move shells from depots to gun positions. It's the difference between fighting with constraints and fighting with abundance. Fuel comparisons are even more lopsided. The United States produces approximately 250 million gallons of refined petroleum products per month in late 1944, much of it allocated to military use. Germany's synthetic fuel production totals approximately 12 million gallons per month, roughly 5% of American output. The Ardennes offensive consumes approximately 2 million gallons of fuel in its first 72 hours, 1/6 of Germany's monthly production. If the offensive continues at that consumption rate, Germany exhausts strategic fuel reserves in 2 weeks. There is no contingency plan for what happens when the fuel runs out, because the plan assumed captured American supplies would solve the problem. When those captures don't materialize, the mathematics become inescapable. December 18th, 11 in the morning, American logistics officers calculate replacement rates for equipment lost in the offensive and compare them to German loss rates. The analysis is revealing. American tank losses, 348 hours. American replacement capacity, 500 per week. Net result, American armored strength increases despite losses, because replacements arrive faster than combat depletes inventory. German tank losses, 672 hours. German replacement capacity, 100 per week. Net result, German armored strength decreases catastrophically, and every loss represents permanent reduction in capability. The same pattern holds for artillery, vehicles, aircraft, and nearly every category of military equipment. The Allies are fighting a war of attrition they're winning by spreadsheet before battles are even fought. The air power disparity becomes decisive once weather clears on December 22nd. Allied air forces in Western Europe have approximately 2,400 aircraft available for operations. Fighters, fighter bombers, medium bombers, all positioned at airfields in France and Belgium with fuel, ammunition, and maintenance facilities to sustain high sortie rates. The Luftwaffe allocates approximately 800 aircraft to support the Ardennes offensive, but fuel shortages limit sortie rates to perhaps 300 per day, and those numbers decline as Allied fighters establish air superiority. By December 23rd, German aircraft avoid daylight operations entirely. Allied aircraft fly with impunity, attacking German columns, destroying vehicles, interdicting supply lines, flying close air support for ground forces. The effect is devastating and one-sided. The material advantage extends to small details that seem insignificant until their absence creates crisis. American soldiers receive regular mail delivery, packages from home, cigarettes, chocolate, coffee. German soldiers on the front lines receive irregular rations, limited ammunition resupply, and letters that may take weeks to arrive if they arrive at all. American wounded are evacuated quickly to well-equipped hospitals with antibiotics, blood plasma, and trained surgeons. German wounded often receive minimal treatment at overwhelmed aid stations, before being transported to hospitals in Germany that lack basic medical supplies. American vehicles break down and are repaired with replacement parts shipped from depots. German vehicles break down and are cannibalized for parts to keep other vehicles running. These small disparities accumulate into large morale differences that affect combat effectiveness. December 19th, 2 in the afternoon, a German logistics report reaches OB West headquarters detailing supply status for units engaged in the Ardennes. The numbers are catastrophic. Fuel, 30% of opening levels. Ammunition, 50% of authorized stockage. Rations, 60%. Replacement personnel, 0. Medical supplies, 40%. The report concludes with a stark assessment. Current consumption rates are unsustainable. Units will reach critical supply levels within 72 hours unless resupply improves dramatically. Resupply cannot improve because Allied air interdiction prevents daylight movement, and German truck inventory is insufficient for nighttime operations. The offensive is consuming itself faster than logistics can sustain. Post-war interrogations of German commanders reveal that many understood the material equation even during the offensive's planning stages. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander of German forces in the West, opposed the offensive as logistically impossible. General Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, argued that fuel shortages would limit the advance to at most 40 miles. Numerous staff officers raised concerns about ammunition expenditure rates, replacement schedules, and the assumption that American supplies would be captured intact. But Hitler overruled all objections, insisting that willpower and tactical surprise would overcome material disadvantages. The offensive proceeded despite professional military advice that it was mathematically unviable. The Allied material advantage doesn't guarantee tactical success. American units still lose battles, still suffer defeats, still make mistakes. But it guarantees strategic resilience, the ability to absorb losses and continue operations without degradation of capability. Germany achieves tactical surprise and operational gains in the offensive's first days. Then material realities reassert themselves. Tanks run out of fuel, artillery runs out of shells, infantry runs out of ammunition, aircraft stay grounded for lack of fuel, and on. The other side, Allied forces receive steady streams of replacements, resupply, reinforcements. The material equation balances inexorably in favor of industrial capacity, and industrial capacity favors the Allies overwhelmingly. By December 22nd, 72 hours into the offensive, the outcome is determined by spreadsheets showing production rates, consumption rates, and replacement schedules. Everything else is just time required for mathematical inevitability to manifest on the battlefield. December 17th, 1944, 3 in the afternoon. Approximately 2,000 American soldiers from the 106th Infantry Division march east in long columns, hands on their heads, guarded by German soldiers who look almost as exhausted as their prisoners. They have surrendered after 2 days of encirclement on the Schnee Eifel, disarmed and captured, now beginning the long walk toward Germany and prison camps they know nothing about. Some prisoners are wounded, supported by comrades or limping on makeshift crutches. Some are in shock, moving mechanically without apparent awareness. Some are angry, humiliated by surrender, looking for opportunities to escape that don't exist. They march through Belgian villages where civilians watch from windows with expressions that mix pity and resignation. The villagers have seen this before in 1940. They know what comes next. The prisoner columns move slowly through terrain still contested by American forces. Artillery fire from both sides falls near the roads, forcing prisoners and guards to take cover together in ditches, united temporarily by mutual desire not to be killed by friendly fire. At night, the columns halt in fields or forests where prisoners huddle together for warmth while guards establish perimeters. Food is minimal. German rations are barely adequate for German soldiers, and there's nothing extra for prisoners. Water comes from streams or melted snow. Latrine facilities consist of designated areas in the forest. It's primitive and degrading, the first taste of what captivity will mean. Some prisoners consider escape during these nighttime halts, but the math doesn't favor it. They're in the middle of a combat zone, miles behind German lines. Winter weather without adequate clothing, no food, no idea where friendly forces are located. Most decide to wait, hoping conditions improve once they reach permanent camps. December 19th, 6 in the evening. The prisoner columns reach the German border and are processed at temporary collection points before being sent to permanent camps. Processing consists of searching for weapons or contraband, recording names and serial numbers, separating officers from enlisted men. German clerks fill out forms in triplicate, creating prisoner records that may or may not survive the war. Some prisoners are interrogated for intelligence value. What unit were you with? What was your mission? What do you know about American? Plans? Most have no useful information to provide. They were frontline infantrymen, aware of their immediate surroundings but ignorant of broader strategy. The interrogations are brief and professional, nothing like the movie versions prisoners expected. Then they're loaded onto trains, packed into boxcars, and transported deeper into Germany. The destination for most Bulge prisoners is Stalag 9B near Bad Orb, a camp originally designed to hold 4,000 prisoners of war. When the first Bulge prisoners arrive in late December, the camp population is approximately 12,000, already 3 times design capacity. By mid-January, it will swell to 23,000 as more prisoners arrive from ongoing operations. The camp commandant protests that he cannot feed, shelter, or provide adequate sanitation for this many men. His protests are ignored. The prisoners keep arriving. Barracks designed for 200 men hold 500. Bunks designed for 1 man hold 3, sleeping in shifts because there's not enough space for everyone to lie down simultaneously. The latrine facilities, barely adequate for the camp's design capacity, are overwhelmed by the actual population. Food becomes the central obsession of prisoner life. Official rations for American prisoners are supposed to meet Geneva Convention standards, approximately 2,500 calories per day. But German logistics in early 1945 are collapsing. Food shipments to prison camps receive lowest priority behind combat units and German civilians. By January, daily rations at Stalag 9B have fallen to approximately 800 calories. Watery soup made from mangal wurzel, animal fodder, a few hundred grams of black bread, occasionally ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Men lose weight rapidly, 20 pounds in the first month, 40 pounds by February. Some waste away to skeletal shadows of their former selves. Vitamin deficiencies cause night blindness, scurvy, other diseases prisoners don't recognize. Medical care is almost non-existent. The camp has 1 German doctor for 23,000 men and minimal medical supplies. The mortality rate among Bulge prisoners significantly exceeds that of Americans captured earlier in the war. Pre-Bulge American prisoners of war in German camps died at approximately 1% per year, mostly from combat wounds suffered during Tiepscher or from disease outbreaks. Bulge prisoners die at nearly 9% during their 4 months of captivity, primarily from malnutrition, disease, and inadequate medical care. The difference isn't intentional mistreatment. German guards are often as hungry as prisoners. The difference is timing. Prisoners captured in 1942 or 1943 entered a German logistics system that, while strained, could still feed prison populations adequately. Prisoners captured in late 1944 enter a system on the edge of collapse, where German civilians are starving and prison camps receive whatever remains after everyone else has been fed, which is almost nothing. Not all Bulge prisoners end up in Stalag 9B. Officers are separated and sent to Oflag 64 in Poland. Some enlisted prisoners go to other camps scattered across Germany. And some prisoners never make it to camps at all, dying during transport or immediately after capture. The Malmedy massacre is the most infamous example. 84 Americans murdered shortly after surrender on December 17th. But evidence suggests other, smaller atrocities occurred throughout the first 72 hours. Prisoners shot while marching because they couldn't keep pace. Wounded prisoners left behind without medical care. Summary executions of prisoners accused of being commandos or spies based on minimal evidence. The scale is impossible to determine. Maybe hundreds of victims, maybe more. The German forces in the Ardennes include SS units with documented records of prisoner mistreatment and Wehrmacht units under extreme pressure, who occasionally cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. Belgian and Luxembourgish civilians play an understated but crucial role in helping American prisoners. Approximately 500 American soldiers escape from German custody during prisoner marches and are hidden by local civilians despite dire German warnings that anyone sheltering Allied soldiers will be executed. Families conceal Americans in cellars, attics, barns, moving them between safe houses when German searches intensify. Resistance networks provide civilian clothing, false documents, and guides who can lead escaped prisoners through German lines back to Allied territory. The risks these civilians take are extraordinary. Entire families can be sent to concentration camps if discovered, but many choose to help anyway, motivated by anti-German sentiment, common humanity, or simple decency. Some prisoners survived the war because Belgian farmers risked everything to hide them. December 21st, 11 in the morning. Private Richard Lockhart, captured on December 19th during the Schnee-Eifel surrender, is being marched east with approximately 300 other prisoners when American fighter bombers strafe the road. German guards scatter. Prisoners dive into ditches. The aircraft make multiple passes, apparently unable to distinguish prisoners from German troops in the confusion. When the attack ends, 14 prisoners are dead or dying, killed by their own side's aircraft. The survivors continue marching, now more afraid of Allied planes than German guards. It's a bitter irony. Men who surrendered to avoid death in combat are killed by friendly fire while prisoners. Nobody records their names. They become statistics in casualty reports, killed in action on dates after they were captured. War's absurdities have no limits. The liberation of German prisoner camps in April and May 1945 reveals conditions that shock even veteran soldiers. American forces reaching Stalag 9B find approximately 20,000 prisoners, many weighing less than 100 pounds, suffering from malnutrition diseases, barely able to walk. The camp commandant surrenders without resistance and attempts to explain that he did the best he could with resources available. The American officers liberating the camp are unimpressed. The prisoners are evacuated to hospitals, fed carefully to avoid refeeding syndrome that can kill starving men given too much food too quickly. Most recover physically over weeks or months. The psychological recovery takes longer. Some never fully recover, carrying trauma from those 4 months for the rest of their lives. The prisoner experience of the Battle of the Bulge receives minimal contemporary coverage and limited historical attention. The focus then and now is on the fighting, Bastogne's siege, Patton's relief, the eventual Allied victory. The prisoners are footnotes, men who surrendered and disappeared into German custody, emerging months later as gaunt survivors with stories nobody wants to hear. American military culture in 1945 doesn't know how to process prisoners of war, men who surrendered rather than fighting to the death. There's unspoken judgment, questions about whether they should have fought harder, held longer, died rather than surrendering. The prisoners sense this judgment and often choose silence over explanation, but their experience is part of the Bulge's story. 20,000 Americans captured in the campaign's first days, 9% dead in captivity, survivors marked by an ordeal that receives no parades and little recognition. They fought until they couldn't fight anymore. Then they survived. That should be enough. December 22nd, 1944, 6 in the morning. Captain James Byrd of B Company, 66th Armored Regiment, stands in the turret of his Sherman tank and watches the sky lighten, from black to gray to pale blue. For the first time in a week, there are no low clouds, no fog, no snow. The cloud ceiling is above 3,000 feet and rising. Visibility extends for miles. He can see terrain features, German positions, the smoke from artillery fire drifting across the Belgian countryside. More importantly, German columns can be seen from the air. Allied fighter bombers have been grounded by weather since December 16th, 6 days of German freedom from air attack. That ends this morning. Bert hears aircraft engines even before he sees them. The distinctive sound of Pratt & Whitney radials that power P-47 Thunderbolts. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arriving from bases in France and England. The weather has broken. The air war begins. The 9th Air Force launches approximately 300 sorties before noon, the largest concentration of close air support aircraft in a single day since the Normandy breakout in July. P-47s armed with bombs, rockets, and 50 caliber machine guns sweep over the Ardennes, looking for targets of opportunity. German columns that have moved freely during previous days are now exposed and vulnerable, supply convoys halted in village squares, tank formations positioned in open fields, artillery batteries deployed without camouflage because there was no need for it under cloud cover. The Thunderbolts attack everything that moves and much that doesn't. 500-pound bombs crater roads and destroy vehicles. High-velocity rockets punch through armor plate. Strafing runs with 50 caliber machine guns shred soft-skinned trucks. The German nickname for American fighter bombers is Jabos, short for Jagdbomber. German soldiers learn to recognize the sound of Thunderbolt engines and dive for cover before the planes are even visible. At Selz, approximately 4 miles from the Meuse River, the German 2nd Panzer Division has reached its high water mark and run out of fuel. 88 tanks and supporting vehicles sit motionless in and around the village. Crews waiting for fuel deliveries that aren't coming, effectively trapped between Allied forces to their front and rear. The division should have withdrawn during darkness, pulled back to positions that could be defended and resupplied, but orders from higher headquarters demanded they hold position, maintain the advance, prepare to resume the offensive once fuel arrived. So, they stayed. And now, with clear weather and daylight, Allied aircraft find them. The attacks begin at 8:30 in the morning and continue intermittently throughout the day. P-47s, British Typhoons, American P-38s. They take turns, orbiting the target area, diving on German vehicles, pulling up after attack runs, circling back for another pass. German anti-aircraft fire is intense but insufficient. By evening, the 2nd Panzer Division has ceased to exist as a functional unit. The air attacks on December 22nd destroy approximately 294 German vehicles across the entire Ardennes front, the highest single-day total of the campaign. The vehicles include tanks, half-tracks, trucks, artillery prime movers, command cars, ambulances, anything with wheels or tracks. Some are destroyed by direct hits. Some are damaged and abandoned when crews realize they're sitting ducks. The psychological effect is as important as physical destruction. German commanders realize they can no longer move during daylight without risking obliteration from the air. All movement must occur at night, which reduces daily operational tempo from 16 hours to 8 hours, which halves the speed of advance, even if fuel were available to sustain movement. The weather turning clear doesn't just allow Allied air operations. It effectively ends German offensive capability by restricting movement to conditions that make sustained offensive operations impossible. At 9 in the morning, elements of Patton's Third Army make first contact with German forces defending the southern approaches to Bastogne. The 4th Armored Division attacks north toward the besieged town, while German units attempt to maintain their siege lines and simultaneously defend against this new threat from the south. German commanders face an impossible dilemma. Commit reserves to stop 4th Armored's relief attack, which weakens the siege of Bastogne and may allow the 101st Airborne to break out, or maintain pressure on Bastogne, which allows 4th Armored to advance unimpeded. They choose a middle course, splitting available reserves, achieving neither objective adequately. It's the kind of compromise that militaries make when facing multiple threats without sufficient forces to address them all. And it's exactly the situation Allied commanders want. German forces reacting to Allied initiatives, defending rather than attacking, making choices between bad options rather than executing their own plan. By 11:45, the first C-47 transport aircraft arrive over Bastogne, carrying supplies for the besieged garrison. Pathfinder teams on the ground mark drop zones with colored panels. Paratroopers in their foxholes watch the sky fill with parachutes, red, blue, yellow, white, carrying ammunition, medical supplies, food, fuel. Some bundles land in German-controlled areas and are lost, but approximately 95% land within American lines and are recovered. The airdrop delivers 334 tons of supplies in a single day, enough to sustain the defense for another week if necessary. More importantly, the airdrop proves to soldiers in Bastogne that they haven't been abandoned, that the army remembers them, that relief is coming. Morale, which has been sustained largely through stubbornness and mutual support, improves dramatically when men see material evidence that they're not alone. December 22nd marks the moment when German commanders begin receiving reports that contradict the offensive's fundamental assumptions. The 6th Panzer Army reports minimal progress against increasingly strong resistance. The 5th Panzer Army reports fuel shortages preventing exploitation of tactical gains. The 7th Army reports American forces attacking its southern flank in battalion strength, possibly regiment strength, threatening the entire offensive's supply lines. Weather has cleared, allowing Allied air forces to operate freely. Allied reinforcements are arriving faster than German intelligence predicted, and most critically, there are no indications that American forces are collapsing, panicking, or considering withdrawal. The hope that Americans would break like the French in 1940 has proven false. German forces are fighting at a conventional attrition battle against an enemy with superior resources and logistics. The mathematics of such battles favor the side with more men, more equipment, and more supplies. That's not Germany. At 2 in the afternoon, P-47 Thunderbolts from the 365th Fighter Group attacked German forces near Celles and claimed destruction of 38 tanks in a single mission, the highest single-sortie tank kill of the war. Post-battle assessment reduces that number to 23 confirmed tank kills, still extraordinary. The aircraft use a new tactic developed specifically for tank hunting, approach at high speed and low altitude, fire rockets from close range to disable or destroy lead and rear vehicles in a column, then circle back to attack trapped vehicles that cannot maneuver. German tank crews learn to abandon their vehicles when they hear aircraft approaching rather than staying inside what becomes a steel coffin. But abandoned tanks are still lost tanks, removed from German combat power just as effectively as if they had been destroyed. The strategic situation on December 22nd appears on situation maps as a bulge extending into Allied lines, the origin of the battle's popular name. German forces have penetrated 30 to 40 miles at the deepest points. They've surrounded Bastogne. They've pushed within 4 miles of the Meuse River near Celles. They've created genuine crisis that required Eisenhower to commit strategic reserves and reorganize command structure. But the offensive has failed to achieve any of its primary objectives. Antwerp remains 100 miles away, completely out of reach. Allied forces haven't split into separate armies. The British 21st Army Group and American 1st and 3rd Armies maintain communication and coordination. German fuel supplies are nearly exhausted, ammunition is running low, casualty replacements don't exist, and weather has cleared, allowing overwhelming Allied air superiority to manifest. At 11 that evening, Field Marshal Model at Army Group B headquarters receives orders from OCO, Hitler's supreme command, transition to defensive operations. The offensive phase of Operation Wacht am Rhein is concluded. German forces will hold positions achieved, but not attempt further advance. The orders are phrased as temporary adjustment, suggesting offensive will resume once logistics improve. But Model understands what the orders really mean. The offensive has failed. Everything from this point forward is fighting withdrawal, delay actions, attempts to extract as much German combat power as possible before Allied counteroffensives complete the encirclement. The gamble has failed. 6 days of operations consumed irreplaceable reserves and achieved nothing except creating a salient that's vulnerable to counterattack from 3 directions. Model doesn't record his thoughts in any surviving document, but other German commanders who served under him recall that December 22nd is when he stopped planning offensive operations and started planning how to save his armies from destruction. December 22nd, midnight, the Battle of the Bulges first. 72 hours end not with dramatic combat or decisive victory, but with exhaustion on both sides. German forces have advanced as far as their fuel and logistics allow. American forces have established defensive positions and committed reserves. The weather has turned. The material advantages that favor the Allies are beginning to manifest. Everything that happens after this point is epilogue to decisions made and opportunities lost in those first 3 days. The Germans achieved surprise but couldn't exploit it quickly enough. The Americans absorbed surprise and recovered faster than German planning assumed. And the mathematics of industrial warfare, temporarily obscured by tactical chaos, are reasserting themselves with remorseless inevitability. The turn happened not in a single moment, but across dozens of small decisions and actions that accumulated into strategic reality. By midnight on December 22nd, that reality is clear to anyone reading situation maps honestly. The offensive has crested. The tide is turning. Everything now depends on how quickly both sides recognize that fact and adjust accordingly. December 23rd, 1944, 8 in the morning. The first 47 transport plane clears the Bastogne perimeter and returns to base in France. The pilot reports perfect drop zone conditions, minimal anti-aircraft fire, parachutes landing where intended. By noon, 144 C-47s have dropped supplies over Bastogne in the largest single-day aerial resupply operation of the campaign. The planes come in formations of 3, flying at 1,000 feet altitude to ensure accuracy, cargo doors open, drop crews pushing bundles out as fast as hands can move. Each plane carries approximately 2,000 pounds of supplies: ammunition, medical supplies, food, radio batteries, whatever the garrison requested. The supplies drift down on colored parachutes that mark different cargo types: red for ammunition, white for medical supplies, yellow for rations. The paratroopers on the ground watch the sky fill with parachutes and cheer. They haven't been abandoned. The army hasn't forgotten them. Relief is possible. The aerial resupply transforms Bastogne's defense from a fight for survival into a sustainable siege. Before December 23rd, the garrison was rationing 1 meal per day, conserving ammunition, treating wounded with inadequate medical supplies. After the first major airdrop, supplies improved to adequate levels. Not comfortable, not generous, but adequate. Artillery battalions can fire when necessary without worry about running out of shells. Riflemen can engage targets without counting every bullet. Medical facilities can treat wounded properly. The psychological lift is as important as the material improvement. Men who thought they might be abandoned now know they're connected to the larger army, that somebody cares enough to fly through anti-aircraft fire to deliver supplies. Morale, always difficult to quantify, demonstrably improves. December 24th, 2 in the afternoon. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command B, under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, punches through German defensive positions at Ardennes, approximately 8 miles south of Bastogne. The attack is brutal and direct. 10 Sherman tanks and approximately 600 infantry in half-tracks charging straight down the main road, accepting casualties, refusing to be stopped. German anti-tank guns destroy 3 Shermans before being overrun. German infantry fires Panzerfaust rockets that disable 2 more tanks. The remaining Shermans keep advancing, machine guns chattering, crushing obstacles, firing into German positions at point-blank range. Behind them, infantry jumps from half-tracks and clears buildings in close combat. It's not elegant. It's not subtle. It's violent momentum applied until resistance breaks. And it works. Abrams's column reaches the village of Ardennes and encounters the last major German defensive position before Bastogne. German paratroopers have fortified buildings, emplaced anti-tank guns, prepared a defense in depth that should require hours to reduce. Abrams doesn't have hours. Every minute of delay means more casualties in Bastogne, more German reinforcements reaching defensive positions, more chance that this attack bogs down like previous relief attempts. He makes a decision that's either brilliant or reckless, depending on whether it succeeds. He orders the tanks to charge through the village at maximum speed, firing continuously, infantry following behind to mop up survivors. The lead Sherman takes a Panzerfaust hit that blows off 1 track. The tank continues on its remaining track, still firing, until it crashes into a building and stops. The second tank assumes lead position and keeps charging. German defenders are so surprised by this tactic that resistance collapses. Some Germans flee, some surrender, some keep fighting until killed. Within 15 minutes, Ardennes is secured and the road to Bastogne is open. December 26, 4:45 in the afternoon. First physical contact between 4th Armored Division and the 101st Airborne occurs when a lieutenant from the 37th Tank Battalion meets a lieutenant from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion at a crossroads on Bastogne's southern perimeter. The tanker shouts, "Come here! This is it!" The paratrooper, suspicious that this might be Germans and captured American tanks, demands recognition codes. The tanker provides correct codes. The paratrooper grins and waves the tanks forward. The siege of Bastogne is officially over. Relief corridor established. The town is no longer isolated. Wounded can be evacuated. Supplies can arrive by road instead of only by air. The 101st has held for 8 days, longer than anyone thought possible, long enough for relief forces to arrive. They did their job, and they survived. The relief corridor is narrow, approximately 500 yards wide, and under German artillery fire from both sides. It's less a secure route than a contested pathway that supply convoys and ambulances use at their own risk. German forces haven't withdrawn. They have simply failed to close the corridor despite multiple attempts. Over the next several days, the corridor will widen as Allied forces push German units away from the road. But on December 26th, driving to Bastogne means accepting that German artillery can drop shells on your vehicle and you have no protection except speed and luck. Ambulances carrying wounded evacuees from Bastogne race down the road at maximum speed. Drivers hunched over steering wheels, hoping shells land somewhere else. Most make it, some don't. The relief is real but imperfect, typical of military operations where success is measured by what's possible rather than what's ideal. The cost of relieving Bastogne is substantial, but considered acceptable by commanders planning the operation. The 4th Armored Division suffers 642 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing, during its 4-day advance from Luxembourg to Bastogne. That's approximately 18% of the division's infantry strength, heavy losses by any standard. Tank losses total 47 Shermans destroyed or disabled, approximately 23% of the division's armor. Artillery and supporting units suffer proportional casualties, but the relief succeeds, which justifies the cost in military calculations, where human lives are balanced against operational objectives. The 4th Armored accomplished its mission. Bastogne held. The German offensive's southern flank is secure. Soldiers died making that happen. There's no way to sugarcoat that reality. For the defenders of Bastogne, relief brings mixed emotions. There's joy at seeing friendly forces, at knowing the siege is over, at the prospect of hot food and rest. But there's also anger that it took so long, that they were left isolated for 8 days, that some friends died during the siege, who might have survived if relief had come sooner. And there's exhaustion that makes emotional response difficult. Men who've been living on adrenaline and fear for more than a week suddenly feel the accumulated fatigue when the immediate threat recedes. Some collapse, some break down crying, some stare blankly, unable to process that they survived. The human cost of the siege isn't measured only in casualties. It's measured in psychological trauma, in memories that will surface decades later, in relationships with buddies that end when relief arrives and the unit disperses. The 101st held Bastogne. Bastogne held them. The strategic significance of Bastogne's relief is that it proves the German offensive has definitely failed. As long as Bastogne was surrounded, there remained possibility, however remote, that German forces might capture the town, open the road network, resume offensive operations. Once Bastogne is relieved, that possibility ends. German forces are now defending positions rather than attacking objectives. The initiative has shifted to the Allies. Eisenhower can plan counteroffensives from secure positions rather than scrambling to contain breakthroughs. The psychological shift is as important as the tactical reality. Allied forces transition from defense to attack. German forces transition from attack to defense. And historically, in the Western democracy's way of war, that transition favors the side with material superiority, operational flexibility, and public support for continued operations, all of which favor the Allies. December 27th, 10 in the morning. General George Patton visits Bastogne to congratulate McAuliffe and the 101st Airborne on their defense. The visit is part military ceremony, part public relations. Patton tours defensive positions, talks to soldiers in their foxholes, poses for photographs with McAuliffe, but he's also assessing whether the 101st can continue operations or needs to be pulled out for rest and reconstitution. What he sees is a division that's physically exhausted, under strength, and probably needs replacement, but he also sees soldiers who aren't ready to quit, who want to continue the fight, who have defended Bastogne and now want to liberate the surrounding area. Patton decides the 101st stays in the line. They've earned the right to finish what they started. Rest can come later. The mythology of Bastogne begins almost immediately, even before the siege ends. War correspondents who arrive with relief forces file stories about the besieged paratroopers who refuse to surrender, about McAuliffe's one-word response, about the dramatic aerial resupply, about the race against time to reach the town before it fell. The stories have truth, but also simplification, reducing complex events to narratives that fit newspaper columns and radio broadcasts. The defense of Bastogne becomes the Alamo that didn't fall, the stand that proved American soldiers could match German troops in determination and courage. It's inspiring, it's partially accurate, and it obscures that dozens of other American units fought similar battles without receiving similar recognition. But mythology serves purposes that history sometimes can't. The Bastogne story gives Americans a clear victory in a campaign that was mostly confusion and crisis. Sometimes people need clear victories, even if reality is more complicated. December 19th, 1944, 9 in the evening. This is the moment, though nobody recognizes it yet, when the German Ardennes offensive becomes mathematically unwinnable. Not obvious on situation maps, where German spearheads still penetrate deep into Allied lines. Not obvious to soldiers in foxholes, who face German attacks that seem as dangerous as ever, but obvious to anyone calculating fuel consumption versus distance remaining, ammunition expenditure versus resupply capacity, casualty rates versus replacement availability. The offensive has consumed 72 hours, achieving approximately 30% of required territorial gains, while consuming approximately 60% of available fuel and 50% of ammunition stocks. The trajectory is unsustainable. Every hour forward consumes resources faster than territory is gained. The mathematics don't lie. The offensive has failed. Everything after December 19th is epilogue. The fighting continues for 5 more weeks. German forces don't immediately withdraw. Allied forces don't immediately counterattack decisively. Both sides maneuver, fight, take casualties, engage in the normal friction of war. But the strategic outcome is determined. Germany cannot advance farther. They lack fuel, ammunition, and reserves. The Meuse River remains unreached. Antwerp is fantasy. The most Germany can accomplish now is inflicting casualties on Allied forces during fighting withdrawal, delaying the inevitable Allied counteroffensive that will push German armies back to starting positions. And delay is temporary victory, buying time for Germany to do what exactly? Produce miracle weapons? Negotiate separate peace? The strategic logic that justified the offensive no longer applies once the offensive fails. Germany has spent irreplaceable resources on an operation that achieved nothing except exposing German forces to counterattack. January 12, 1945. German forces begin general withdrawal to their December 16th start lines, abandoning the Bulge they created at such cost. The withdrawal is conducted professionally. Rear guards delay American advances, engineers demolish bridges, supply units evacuate or destroy anything useful. But it's still retreat, giving back terrain purchased with German blood. The withdrawal takes 12 days, roughly half the time the advance required. Allied forces follow cautiously, probing for weaknesses, avoiding frontal assaults against prepared German positions. By January 25th, the front line has returned approximately to December 16th positions. The Bulge no longer exists on situation maps. 27 days of offensive operations, followed by 12 days of withdrawal, have resulted in exactly 0 permanent territorial gain for Germany. But permanent losses in men and material that cannot be replaced. The casualty figures tell the story with brutal clarity. American losses: approximately 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, 15,000 captured or missing. Total: 81,000 casualties. German losses: approximately 12,000 killed, 38,000 wounded, 50,000 captured or missing. Total: 100,000 casualties. Both sides suffer grievously, but context matters. American casualties represent approximately 2% of total. Forces available in Western Europe and can be replaced within 3 weeks from personnel in training or redeployed from Pacific operations. German casualties represent approximately 20% of committed forces and cannot be replaced. The German army that emerges from the Bulge is weaker, less capable, and facing the same Allied armies but with fewer resources to resist them. Equipment losses follow similar patterns. American forces lose approximately 800 tanks during the campaign. By February 1st, all losses are replaced, and American armored strength in Western Europe exceeds pre-offensive levels because tanks arrived faster than combat destroyed them. German forces lose approximately 1,400 tanks, 50% more than they started with, because some losses occurred in non-combat abandonments due to fuel exhaustion. German tank strength in Western Europe never recovers. Those 1,400 tanks represent approximately 250% of Germany's December production. Every tank lost in the Bulge is 3 months of production that can't be replaced because Allied bombing continues degrading German industrial capacity. The strategic consequences of the offensive's failure are catastrophic for Germany. The Eastern Front, temporarily neglected while resources were concentrated for the Ardennes, collapses under renewed Soviet offensive in January. German forces that might have stabilized the Eastern Front were committed to the West and lost. The Western Front, which Germany hoped to stabilize through the offensive's success, instead faces Allied armies that suffered casualties but retained offensive capability, while German armies suffered losses that permanently reduced their strength. Germany is now fighting two-front war with diminished resources against enemies whose material superiority grows monthly. The Ardennes offensive was supposed to change this equation. Instead, it accelerated Germany's collapse. February 1945. Interrogations of captured German officers provide insight into German perspectives on the offensive's failure. Multiple officers state they recognized the plan was impossible, but followed orders because refusing was not option. Several mention that logistics estimates were known to be optimistic, but higher headquarters dismissed concerns. One captured colonel states, "We knew by December 20th that we had lost, but we were ordered to continue attacking, so we continued." The interrogation reports reveal that German professional military judgment recognized the offensive's flaws before it began, but institutional loyalty and fear of Hitler's reaction prevented those concerns from stopping the operation. The human cost is staggering and often overlooked in strategic assessments. 3,000 Belgian civilians killed during the offensive, caught in crossfire, or deliberately targeted by German forces retreating through villages. 20,000 American soldiers became prisoners of war, 9% of whom died in captivity. Approximately 15,000 Americans killed, each death creating concentric circles of grief, extending to families, communities, entire towns that lost multiple soldiers. Unknown numbers of German soldiers killed. Records are incomplete or destroyed, but certainly tens of thousands, each representing a family that will never see their son, husband, or father again. War produces these costs. But the Bulge's costs were inflicted for an offensive that failed to achieve any strategic objective, making every casualty a sacrifice for nothing. The Battle of the Bulge enters American popular memory as a victory, proof that American soldiers could withstand Germany's best punch and counterattack successfully. This narrative is accurate but incomplete. Yes, American forces rallied after initial surprise. Yes, they held critical positions like Bastogne and St. Vith. Yes, they ultimately defeated the offensive. But the victory was close, far closer than post-war mythology suggests. If Eisenhower had delayed committing reserves by 24 hours, if Patton had taken a week instead of 3 days to pivot north, if weather had stayed bad for 3 more days preventing air operations, if any of dozens of small decisions had gone differently, the outcome could have changed. American victory resulted from professional command decisions, tactical competence by junior officers, and logistical superiority that allowed mistakes to be overcome. It was victory, but hard-earned and near-run. The offensive's failure also reveals Hitler's fundamental misunderstanding of how industrial democracies wage war. Hitler assumed Americans would break under pressure, that casualties and confusion would create panic and political pressure to negotiate. He was projecting Germany's situation onto America, assuming all nations respond to crisis similarly. But America in late 1944 had public support for continuing the war, industrial capacity to replace losses, and military command structure that could adapt to surprise without collapsing. The Bulge didn't create American calls for negotiated peace. It created American determination to finish the war quickly by destroying German military capacity completely. Hitler's gamble didn't just fail militarily, it backfired politically, hardening Allied resolve to accept only unconditional surrender. Post-war analysis by military historians gradually identifies the first 72 hours as the campaign's decisive period. German forces achieved maximum surprise and advance in those hours. American forces made critical decisions about reserve commitment, command structure, and defense of key terrain in those hours. The tactical chaos of those days obscured that strategic outcomes were being determined. By December 19th, 72 hours into the offensive, German forces had achieved their maximum penetration, but exhausted their capability to exploit it. American forces had contained the breakthrough and committed reserves that would eventually counterattack. Everything afterward was implementation of decisions made in those first 3 days under pressure and with incomplete information. The forgotten heroes of the Bulge emerge in historical retrospect. The engineer battalions that held towns with rifles instead of building bridges. The reconnaissance platoon at Lanzerath that delayed an entire panzer division for 24 hours. The defenders of St. Vith, who bought 6 days for defensive lines to form elsewhere. The quartermaster troops who evacuated fuel depots hours before German tanks arrived. These aren't the stories that make headlines or Hollywood films. They're the small unit actions that accumulate into strategic effects. The unglamorous work that determines outcomes, while dramatic battles capture attention. The Bulge was won in unknown villages by soldiers whose names appear in no history books, whose actions were recorded in after-action reports that few people read, whose sacrifices bought hours or days that proved decisive. December 17th, 2005. 61 years after the battle, the Presidential Unit Citation is finally awarded to Lyle Book's Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon for their stand at Lanzerath. 18 men who held a crossroads for 20 hours against 500 German paratroopers, delaying Kampfgruppe Piper for 24 critical hours, are recognized 37 years after initial recommendation and 61 years after the action. Book, now 82 years old, accepts the citation on behalf of his platoon. In his acceptance speech, he says something that captures the Bulge's essence. "We did what needed to be done. So did thousands of others. We just happened to be in the right place where it mattered." That's the Battle of the Bulge in summary. Thousands of soldiers doing what needed to be done in places that mattered. The first 72 hours determined where those places were and what needed doing. Everything else was execution. The Battle of the Bulge ends officially on January 25, 1945, with front lines restored to approximately December 16th positions. But its effects ripple forward, influencing the war's final months. The offensive delayed Allied crossing of the Rhine River by approximately 6 weeks, extending the war in Europe by perhaps a month. But it also consumed German reserves that might have defended the Rhine more effectively, possibly accelerating the war's end by preventing sustained German resistance. Historical counterfactuals are unprovable, but most analysts conclude that the Bulge shortened, rather than lengthened the war, by destroying German offensive capability without inflicting proportional damage on Allied forces. Germany gambled everything on one throw of the dice. The dice came up snake eyes, and the Allies collected the pot.